pleased to be here on campus of Ohio University, Dean Street campus, and I know the Dean has a, so if we could have the Dean Richard Greenlee come forward first, the Dean's right there. I thought he was right there. Come right around.
Just want to welcome you to our campus, and we're glad you took the opportunity to use our fine facilities, and we're going to have a very productive meeting.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you so much for your hospitality. It's a chance to be with you. We'll start with opening statements and then get right to our first panel. We have two panels, and we look forward to hearing the testimony from everyone. Let me again thank the Dean and the university here for allowing us to be here this morning. I also want to thank Congressman Bill Johnson. We're in the fine district of the Congressman, and we appreciate him joining us today, as well as Congressman Kelly from Pennsylvania and Congressman McKinley from West Virginia. It's important and helpful for the committee to hear firsthand about the problems facing local communities across the United States. We've come here today to learn more about the effects of the Obama administration's war on coal and the impact of federal regulations on families and businesses here in Southeast Ohio. Coal is very important to communities in this area and to the nation as a whole. According to 2010 data from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, there are 765 coal operations employing over 32,000 miners. As of 2011, these three states accounted for over 20% of the coal production in the United States. Not only in coal produced in this region, but it is used here too. As of 2010, Ohio derived 82% of its electricity from coal. For Pennsylvania, this figure was 48%. West Virginia relied on coal for almost 97% of its electricity that year. And America needs coal to provide nearly half of its entire electricity. Coal is used so heavily because it is cheap, reliable, and abundant. Inexpensive and dependable electricity is crucial to manufacturing operations, which is important to the state like Ohio that depends on manufacturing to create jobs. However, coal in this country is under assault by this administration. The president has made statements indicating his support for ending or significantly curtailing the use of coal and other fossil fuels as an energy source. In 2008, as a candidate, then Senator Obama said, quote, "Under my plan of a cap and trade system, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket. Coal-powered plants, natural gas, you name it, whatever the plants were, whatever the industry was, they would have to retrofit their operations. That will cost money." Unfortunately, it appears the president is making good on his campaign promise. The president's anti-coal philosophy has found its way into the operations of the United States Environmental Protection Agency, among other parts of the administration. In fact, the EPA has been the most zealous in enacting the president's philosophy. The agency has taken unprecedented actions by overstepping its congressionally approved authority under the Clean Water Act to slow down new coal permits and to attempt to veto existing permits after they have already been approved properly by the Army Corps of Engineers. EPA's assault on the coal industry has also taken the form of rules that will make it harder to use coal. Notable examples of this assault include the utility MACT rule, which will require extremely expensive upgrades to coal-fired power plants, and the greenhouse gas new source performance standards for electric generation units, which would essentially ban the construction of new coal-fired electricity generating facilities. These regulations will cost billions of dollars and will result in massive job losses. I want to welcome today's witnesses. Thank you all for being here. We look forward to hearing your testimony on the impact of the EPA regulations and permitting issues on the coal industry and on job creation and economic growth here in Southeast Ohio. We also appreciate the attendance of the witnesses representing the EPA and look forward to their testimony on the second panel. These witnesses represent the two regional administration offices that have jurisdiction over Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. I look forward to hearing more from them about the role that the EPA's regional administrators play in implementing the policies of this administration. Again, thank you all for coming, and we'll get to our witnesses here in just a minute. First, I want to yield to the gentleman from Ohio, whose district we are in, Johnson. Oh, yeah, we got one housekeeping. We need a unanimous consent to have Mr. Johnson sit on the committee and participate in today's hearing. Seeing no objection, hearing no objection. Mr. Johnson, excuse me, we need that for David as well. No objection, without objection, so ordered. And Mr. Johnson, you're recognized for your opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you yielding me time and for hosting this important hearing on the administration's war on coal. I'd also like to thank our witnesses for taking the time to come and testify before us today on this important issue. You know, since taking office, this president and his administration has led an all-out fight against the coal industry. And the fight has been a two-front war, one on the production side of coal and one on the market side of the coal industry. On the production side, we've seen the EPA slow walk permitting for coal mines, and in one egregious case, they even retroactively vetoed a permit that had been approved by the Army Corps of Engineers. But the EPA isn't the only department in the administration attacking the ability of coal companies to mine our natural resources. The Department of the Interior has been trying to rewrite the 2008 stream buffer zone rule since late January of 2009, just mere days after this president took office. By some estimates, this proposed rewrite of the stream buffer zone rule could cost tens of thousands of direct and indirect jobs and cause the price of electricity to skyrocket. And now, since I took office in 2011, I've been fighting tooth and nail to stop the administration from going forward with this new rule, and I have introduced legislation to do exactly that. On the market side of the equation, the EPA has aggressively placed standards on coal-fired power plants that are unrealistic and uneconomical for utility companies to meet. Power plants throughout the Midwest are left with the impossible decision of shutting down or spending billions of dollars raised through rate hikes on consumers to meet the new standards. Down near my home of Marietta, Ohio, a large power plant will close in the coming months because of these new standards. Over 150 Ohioans will lose their jobs, and families and small businesses will be left with higher utility rates. And as a candidate, as the chairman pointed out, the president told us what his policies toward coal and coal-fired power generation would do when he infamously said that if a company wants to build a coal-fired power plant, they can, but it will bankrupt them. And this president doesn't seem to understand that for states like Ohio, which receives over 80% of its power from coal plants, the people who are hit hardest are the seniors on fixed income, hardworking families, and the small businesses that are the job engines of our economy. In fact, the average American family has seen a $300 per year increase in their utility bills since this president took office, and that is a direct impact of his crippling coal policies. Now, you can guarantee that this number will only go up for Ohioans if the president's war on coal is not stopped and is not stopped soon. I'd like to thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for hosting this important hearing and shedding light on this administration's economically destructive coal policies, and I look forward to hearing the important testimony from our witnesses. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. Now yield to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Kelly, for his opening statement.
I thank you, Chairman, for holding this hearing. You know, I'm not too far from here over in Pennsylvania, and there's a lot of my friends that are in the coal business. And most of the time, when I get a chance to talk to people, you know, I talk about a country that's been so blessed with natural resources. You know, coal is abundant, it's accessible, it's affordable. And it's been the backbone of our nation's electric power for so long. Pennsylvania, about half of the electricity we have in Pennsylvania comes from coal. And I hear people talk about coal, they talk about coal in a way that I don't particularly care for. And I know this administration does have a war on coal. Do not be fooled by the small talk and the chit-chat about they don't. I'm telling you, there is a war on coal. There is a war on fossil fuels. Now, this administration, through the EPA, has made it very difficult for my friends that are in the coal business and making it more difficult for Americans who rely on touching that switch and flipping it on and having their lights come on. Able to cool their houses in the summer, able to light lights and do an awful lot of things and run their industry. So when you hear this going on day after day, week after week, month after month, it's time to stop chit-chatting and tap dancing around the issues. Now listen, all of us want clean air, all of us want clean water. But you know what we also want? We want our economic freedom. Why in the world would we put this country at risk with the abundance of natural resources we have, the abundance of coal that we have, 200 years supply, right here beneath our feet? Other places around the world would love to have what we have. They look at us and they scratch their head and say, what is it with you folks? Why would you put yourselves behind the 8 ball? Why would you put yourselves in a position where you can't power yourselves? Now, I'm glad we're having this hearing today, and I'm glad the public's here, and I hope that America is paying attention. There are very clear decisions of the way this country is being run. And for those of you who aren't watching it closely, please, wake up and smell the coffee. We are at dire risk of losing the greatest country in the world because of an onerous government that keeps its boot on the throat of our job creators, that keeps its boot on coal and does not want coal as part of our energy production. Make no mistake about it. That's what they're trying to do. So the fact that we're here today, we're able to talk to different witnesses and talk to people who do produce this power and produce this product that allows America to rise to the top, I sure welcome that chance. And we also have our friends from the EPA here. I've got to tell you, gentlemen, at some point, somebody better take a look at what's happening in America. We cannot legislate and regulate and make it impossible for America to continue its great success if we keep up with these policies. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield back, and thank you so much for having this hearing.
I thank the gentleman for his comments. The gentleman reminded me that the world's better and safer when America leads. And the simple fact is you cannot lead militarily, you cannot lead diplomatically if you first don't lead economically, and you cannot lead economically if you don't have energy. And the gentleman's comments about affordable, abundant, and accessible coal is critical to being able to lead in that energy area, and therefore to be able to lead economically, and therefore to make the world a better place. And so that's really what's at stake here, and I appreciate the gentleman's comments from Pennsylvania. They were right on target. We now yield to the gentleman from West Virginia for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan, and thank you for holding this hearing today to expose this war on coal being waged by the EPA and the President Obama's administration. The coal that's mined here in eastern Ohio and throughout West Virginia powers America and provides good-paying jobs for thousands of families and revenue for numerous state and local governments. But the coal industry and the coal-fired electric generating plants are under siege, and their future is indeed in jeopardy. Under the pretext of global warming, his political support from radical environmental extremists, and his passion for renewable energy models, President Obama is relentlessly pursuing a dangerous gamble of diminishing the contribution of coal in our country's energy portfolio. The President himself has said, as you've heard from other speakers, that he may not be able to prevent coal-fired utilities from being constructed, but the taxes and regulations that he'll impose will bankrupt those that try. Or how about Secretary of Energy, Secretary Chu, who has said coal is his worst nightmare. The leading speaker for energy in America has said coal is his worst nightmare. Or Vice President Biden, who has said that the President administration is not supporting clean coal technology. Or what about Senator Reid, who announced that coal makes me sick. It's ruining our country. But wait, what about the assault from the EPA? The coal industry and the electric generating plants have had to deal with issues like delayed water permitting, unreasonable water conductivity expectations, a mercury emission standard that's crippling the current plants, a threat of treating coal ash as a hazardous material, regulating minute particular matters designated with virtually no health benefit, but costing the consumers billions of dollars, proposing new source performance standards when there is no technology available to perform that standard, cooling water temperature, cross-state air pollution standard, intimidation of state and local environmental agencies by the powerful EPA, potential roadblocks preventing companies from exporting coal and even natural gas and oil, and then coupled with a 41% reduction in the R&D of spending at the Department of Energy's money for clean coal technology. That's backed on the fact that last year they had a 39% reduction in the R&D for clean coal technology. This form of industrial harassment has already caused utilities across America to initiate plans reluctantly to begin the closure of approximately 125 power generating plants across America out of the 700. That's a result of almost 25% less power is going to go into the grid because of this war on coal. But keep in mind, the EPA's own economic model only predicted a 2% reduction. How wrong they have been. The integrity of the grid, the ability of consumers and manufacturers to have access to low-cost electricity could very well be put to the test in the coming years unless other electrical generation from natural gas, oil, biomass, hydro, wind, solar become available and dependable. President Obama is depending on the environmental side of his equation to shore up his argument for this war on coal. Little, if any, the global greenhouse gas emissions can be achieved without comparably enforced environmental standards in China and India. Both of these countries are seizing every opportunity to expand their economies using coal as a primary energy source. More specifically, China has been constructing the equivalent of our new powerhouse, coal-fired powerhouse, every week for the last 3 years. 12 years ago, the United States and China were both producing and operating on 1 billion tons of coal. 12 years later, China is now at 3 billion tons, triple. In just 12 years, they've tripled their dependency and use of coal, whereas in America, we're still back at 1.1 billion, but we're exporting the majority of that. We all want clean, affordable, and dependable energy with increases, not reductions in funding for R&D. We will get there. The ideologues and regulators in Washington need to step back and simply say to themselves, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Regulators need to slow down and take a close look at the economic impact of their actions. Perhaps if these regulators and bureaucrats got out of the Washington Beltway and came over to America's coal fields here in eastern Ohio and throughout West Virginia and toured the technological marvels of our country's coal-fired powerhouses and met with the hardworking men and women in these communities, perhaps then they wouldn't turn their backs on our nation's coal industries. Hopefully this hearing held today in the heart of Ohio's coal belt will demonstrate once and for all that the coal industry and our coal-fired utilities are clearly in an all-out confrontation with the Obama administration and its rogue agency, the EPA. The outcome of this struggle, this war on coal, will demonstrate how viable our communities will be in the future and how manufacturers and consumers will react if King Coal is overthrown. Look forward to hearing more of the testimony, and I yield back my time. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman for his opening statement, which is right on target. All right, let me introduce our first panel. We have Mr. Bob Hodenbosi, who is the Chief of Division of Air Pollution Control at the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency. We have the Honorable Andy Thompson, good to have you with us, representative who represents the 93rd District in the Ohio House of Representatives. Mr. Anthony Ahern, who is President and CEO of the Ohio Rural Electric Cooperatives, Inc. and Buckeye Powering. And Mr. Tom Mackel, who is the President of Sterling Mining Corporation. Gentlemen, we want to thank you. You know how it works. You have to listen to us first. Now you get to go. You get 5 minutes. If you can stick to that 5 minutes, that'd be great. We're kind of lenient. But one thing we have to do, just practice of the oversight committees before we hear from Mr. Hodenbosi first. We want to swear you in. So if you'll each stand up and raise your right hand. You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I do. Let the record show that each witness answered in the affirmative. And Mr. Hodenbosi, you are recognized now for your 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to provide this committee with information on the effects of U.S. EPA requirements on the coal industry in Ohio and surrounding states. These series of new and additional standards continue to increase the cost of using this important domestic fuel. My name is Robert Hodenbosi. I'm Chief of the Division of Air Pollution Control at Ohio EPA. I have almost 40 years of experience in the field of air pollution control and have seen great improvements in air quality in the Ohio Valley and throughout the state. Attached is an example of the dramatic improvement in sulfur dioxide concentrations in Ohio. This improvement came at a substantial cost to Ohio utilities and industry. This reduction of sulfur dioxide emissions even further will require an even greater expense to obtain a diminishing return in improvement in air quality. There are several regulatory initiatives underway by US EPA that have a direct adverse impact on coal or the major users of coal. In June of 2012, US EPA promulgated a more restrictive ambient air quality standard for sulfur dioxide at 75 parts per million 1 hour average. This new standard was promulgated without the implementation requirements for states to follow. US EPA issued draft guidance on the air dispersion modeling methodology that should be used in attainment areas. Over 20 state and local air agencies expressed concern to US EPA over the proposed methodology. After these concerns were raised by state and local air agencies and others, the US EPA held a series of stakeholder meetings to receive comments on possible revisions to the guidance. We are still awaiting the outcome of the meetings and guidance. The cross-state air pollution rule was promulgated in 2011 to regulate the amount of emissions of sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide from utilities that can affect downwind states. This rule allows for limited trading of emissions. With the continued tightening of ambient air quality standards, US EPA will be required to go back and promulgate even more restrictive standards. This leads to more regulatory uncertainty and increased costs to operate coal-fired power plants, leading to decreased use of coal. On February 16, 2012, the US EPA promulgated the Utility Mercury and Air Toxics Rule to reduce emissions from coal-fired power plants. This rule establishes very stringent standards for emissions of mercury, particulate matter, and hydrochloric acid. The federal rule allows 3 years to comply with the standards, so by February 16, 2015, all units must be in compliance. US EPA recognizes that the compliance date will be difficult to achieve for many units, and state permitting authorities have the ability to extend the compliance deadline by 1 year. Ohio EPA has already initiated preliminary discussions with Ohio utilities to outline the documentation that will be necessary to approve the 1-year extension. What has been the result of all these US EPA rules? There have been a series of announcements by the utility companies that over 25 boilers at power plants in Ohio will be closed. These closures will have a direct impact on the mining and the use of coal. Although these units are older, this does not mean that these units are no longer used. The Columbus Dispatch reported that some industrial consumers were required to reduce electrical consumption due to the lack of available electricity during the recent heat wave. For American Electric Power Company in Ohio, except for the small Pickaway unit, the other plants scheduled for shutdown were in operation. Ohio EPA remains concerned that if there are spot shortages of electricity today, the problem will be exacerbated when Ohio loses significant electrical generation capacity due to the closures as a result of the US EPA requirements. US EPA has proposed standards for new coal-fired utility plants in the form of new source performance standards. In the proposal, US EPA sets a standard for new coal plants to be the same as efficient new gas-fired plants. This proposed standard has not been achieved in practice by any coal-fired plant. Another aspect of this rule is that both the news release and preamble state that the rule only addresses new sources. However, US EPA signed a consent decree that commits the agency to regulate new, modified, and existing sources. Once this NSPS rule is promulgated, US EPA will have no choice but to go forward on regulating existing sources under 111D of the Clean Air Act. Again, there is no cost-effective controls for CO2 from existing power plants. This particular issue will have a huge impact on the continued operation of coal-fired power plants in the Midwest and elsewhere. There are also additional requirements that the US EPA is proposing on facilities that use coal. The US EPA is moving forward to tighten limitations on water discharges from coal-fired power plants and to change the manner that coal residuals are regulated. Finally, any significant increase in electric rates will have adverse impact on Ohio industry. For example, the only 2 magnesium ferroalloy plants in the United States are located in Marietta, Ohio, and New Haven, West Virginia. These plants are located near power plants due to the large electric demand needed to make the product. These plants can only remain competitive if there's reliable, inexpensive electric power. The same issue applies to aluminum producer Ormet in Hannibal, Ohio, and other metal producers and alloy manufacturers in Ohio. For Ohio and other states to maintain an industrial base, there will continue to be the need for inexpensive power. Thank you for the opportunity to present these views on behalf of Ohio EPA. We'd be glad to work with the committee to provide recommendations on U.S. EPA requirements that are protective of public health but do not have as great an adverse impact on coal and coal-related industries.
Thank you. Appreciate your fine testimony. Representative Thompson, you're recognized.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify at this hearing. My name is Andy Thompson. I'm in my first term representing Ohio's 93rd House District and represent Guernsey, Noble, and Monroe, as well as portions of Washington and Muskingum counties. Before being elected to the state legislature, I served on the Marietta City Council for 3 terms, getting elected to my final term in 2009. Appreciate the opportunity to speak before you today about the impacts of the Obama administration's ill-advised energy and environmental policies and their impacts here in Ohio. Today I would like to discuss, number one, the administration's war on coal and the impact on coal jobs, the impact on utility jobs in the greater coal communities, what this means for manufacturing in Ohio, and how this impacts our growing natural gas industry. This is coal country, and here in eastern Ohio, we rely on coal not only for electricity, but also for good paying jobs and a strong tax base to help provide critical services. Coal not only provides jobs for our miners, equipment operators, and support personnel, it also provides many jobs in surrounding communities where coal industry employees work and live. For example, a study from Pennsylvania State University has demonstrated that every direct coal mining job supports 11 other jobs in such areas as trucking, railroads, and equipment suppliers, as well as local businesses, including restaurants, stores, and gas stations. Coal's been integral to the well-being of eastern Ohio's communities for many, many years. And when coal's doing well, we do well. But unfortunately, coal is in a tough spot right now. Many of the environmental policies that the Obama administration has undertaken in recent years have caused substantial hardship in our region, and I fear this may only be the beginning. Just last week, a major coal mine in my district announced that it was laying off 29 workers in direct response to several Obama administration policies aimed at coal. Not too long before that, I learned of a surface mining company in Noble County that cannot get any new permits approved by the Corps of Engineers and the EPA. This company has mined almost all of its permitted property, but now is considering shutting down operations because the government has not granted it new permits. These are just 2 of the many troubling examples that have been brought to my attention recently. As every elected official knows, this is county fair season, and every fair that I've been to, people have come up to me and expressed deep concern about the war on coal and what it means for communities and for eastern Ohio. These people have spouses, brothers, and uncles in the mining business, and they're all scared for its future and for their own future. I hear this more than any other issue. People in eastern Ohio are deeply concerned that the war on coal is going to ruin their livelihoods, their families, and their communities. When you hear about layoffs in the coal industry, you generally think about coal miners and others who work at a mine, and that's understandable because they're the first ones to lose their jobs and their livelihoods when a coal mine shuts down. But we also need to be thinking about what's going to happen to the people who work at the coal-fired facilities that are being shut down. Those layoffs are starting to happen right here in Ohio. For example, AEP will shut down 5 units at the Muskingum River plant in Beverly, costing 128 jobs. They'll shut down 1 unit at the Conesville generating station, eliminating 20 jobs. AEP will shut down 1 unit for 9 months annually at its Bickley plant near Lockbourne, costing 24 jobs. Duke will shut down one of its generating units at its Beckert station in New Richmond, impacting 120 jobs. First Energy will close units at Bayshore, East Lake, Lakeshore, and Ashtabula locations, jeopardizing up to 530 jobs. GenOn will shut 2 units at its Avon Lake plant, costing 80 jobs. And GenOn will shut 2 units at its Niles plant, cutting 40 jobs. But Ohio alone will not be the only state impacted in our region from the war on coal. 2 facilities are slated to shut their doors on the other side of the border in Pennsylvania, and 3 are going to shut down across the river in West Virginia. When you add in the job losses in West Virginia and Pennsylvania, we're talking about nearly 9,000 direct, indirect, and induced jobs in the Ohio Valley. Ohio is a manufacturing state, and it always has been. The energy boom in the Midwest has provided many opportunities that Ohioans are excited to pursue, but those opportunities are running head-on into the Obama administration's environmental policies. Let me provide a key example. The largest electricity user in Ohio is Ormet Corporation in Monroe County, which is an aluminum producer capable of producing 270,000 tons of aluminum per year. Ormet had employed roughly 1,100 employees, with more than 900 represented by the United Steelworkers Union. But the company just announced that it is considering laying off 90 to 100 of them due to concerns about increasing electricity prices. We're going to continue seeing this at other manufacturing facilities, both large and small, all across Ohio. Mr. Chairman, coal is not the only industry taking the brunt of this administration's destructive environmental policies. Unfortunately, despite the unprecedented boom in natural gas production in our state, environmentalists at the Obama and the Obama administration are starting to turn a negative eye to natural gas. I'm sure everyone knows about the Beyond Coal campaign run by the Sierra Club. Now they're beginning a Beyond Natural Gas campaign, which will attempt to cast the same negative light on the natural gas industry that it did on the coal industry. And the Obama administration is not far behind. There are many questions at the end of the day about the Obama administration's policies toward coal and natural gas industries, but what people really want to know is how much this is going to cost, and the costs are substantial. I see that I'm running out of my time, so I will wrap it up here. I want to thank you and your colleagues, Chairman Jordan, for conducting this much-needed oversight of the Obama administration. I very much appreciate your efforts, along with Speaker Boehner and Majority Leader Cantor and others, to pass several bills promoting energy development and reining in the EPA and the administration. I want to acknowledge Congressman Johnson as well, because I know that he's worked very hard on this. I just wish the United States Senate and the President of the United States would follow suit. I should also note, Mr. Chairman, that I'm doing my best here in Ohio to support those efforts. Specifically, I've sponsored 2 separate resolutions in the legislature urging the President to suspend both the Utility Act and CASPR. I also led passage of a resolution in the House of Representatives that urges the President to discard proposals to increase taxes on producers of coal, natural gas, and oil, and instead adopt policies that encourage domestic production of these important resources. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for inviting me to testify today. I'd be pleased to answer any questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. We appreciate your work in the General Assembly. Mr. Ahern, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and other committee members. I appreciate the opportunity to give testimony to you today. Buckeye Power is a generation and transmission cooperative owned by the Ohio Distribution Cooperatives. Ohio cooperatives serve 10% of the state of Ohio for electricity. Just upriver from where we're sitting here is the Cardinal Station, and we own 2 of the 600 megawatt units there, Cardinal Units 2 and 3. We have spent, in the last 10 years, $1 billion for SCR and scrubbers for those units. We've made, as a result, a substantial reduction in sulfur dioxide and NOx emissions, as this chart over here vividly shows. A significant reduction. The Cardinal now is able to use local high sulfur coal, so jobs have been added with this investment, and it has helped the economy. Our Cardinal units are among the cleanest in terms of conventional pollutant coal plants in the United States. But this has come at a cost. The average residential cooperative consumer today pays about $20 more a month to provide this result. But they are getting something for this. There's an air quality benefit, and everybody's happy about it. Our members are happy about it. I wish I could end my story here, but I can't. And why can't I? Because EPA is overly aggressively pursuing additional regulations. Let me give you an example using the MATS, the Mercury and Air Toxics Rule. When EPA was looking at whether they should impose MATS, they assessed the damages, the health effects from mercury and hazardous air pollutants, and they estimated that the annual economic value or impact on the country was $6 million a year. They then estimated what it was going to take to reduce emissions to what they considered an acceptable level, and that number was $9.6 billion. That's right, $4 to $6 million benefit at a $9.6 billion cost. Well, how did they connect the two? They've done what they've been doing for many years now, double counting. Mercury benefits alone couldn't justify their actions, so they looked at secondary benefits, in this case, fine particulate reductions, which they already regulate under another part of the Clean Air Act. So they're using compliance of fine particulate, what is referred to as PM 2.5, by taking those levels below what they have established as an acceptable PM 2.5 limit, as a level that they've established as protective of human health. This has got to stop, this double counting. The MATS rule, we are going to be able to meet the MATS rule, we think. We're going to be close, perhaps, but we think we've done enough. We don't think we should have to incur more costs. But our biggest concern about the MATS rule is that the monitoring requirements. We strongly believe, and EPA has provided testimony that have said they think that the combination of SCR and scrubbers on eastern coal takes care of mercury. So we're not really concerned about whether our mercury level is going to be on an absolute basis low enough. We believe it is. Our problem is going to be proving it through testing, because mercury is so dilute in concentration. I mean, the standard that they want to apply is 1.2 pounds per trillion BTUs. You typically think about emissions in pounds per million. This is pounds per trillion. So we're very concerned about the mercury emissions. Let me echo what other speakers have already said today about the greenhouse gas rule. Our nation is foreclosing coal with this action. History has shown that it is dangerous to think that we can predict over the long term what energy sources are going to be economical and reliable. In the past, our federal government has banned the use of natural gas for electric generation. Nuclear power, it has its ups and downs. Therefore, the prudent course of action is to not put all of our eggs in one basket. We need to retain coal for reliable generation. And as Mr. Hodenbosse has already said, one of the biggest problems we have with the greenhouse gas rule is they then will apply it to existing units, and we think this should be correct. So on behalf of Buckeye Power and Ohio Cooperative Consumers, I thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for allowing me to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Ahern. We appreciate your work and your organization's work. You've been extremely helpful over the years. We've dealt with the cap and trade issue and other things. We appreciate that and being here today. Mr. Mackel, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Jordan and members of the subcommittee, good morning. My name is Tom Mackel, and I'm the president of the East Fairfield Coal Company. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you once again. East Fairfield Coal Company has operations in both Ohio and Pennsylvania, and we employ over 160 hardworking Americans. We mine underground for clay, coal, and limestone. We are a small business, and I'm proud to say that my father worked for the company when it started in 1934. I have been with the company for over 40 years, and my son works there today. In 2008, then Senator Obama stated in a press interview that under the preferred policy of cap and trade, anyone who wanted to build a new coal-fired power plant would go bankrupt in the process. He stated that under his cap and trade plan, electricity prices would necessarily skyrocket. He left out the fact that it would put thousands of people out of work. The Obama administration has systematically waged a war on coal, attacking the industry on multiple fronts, and to date, they've been very successful. I would like to address today a few of the details on the war on coal. On permitting, they continue to raise new obstacles. Through the use of administrative guidance, the administration has effectively implemented a policy where isolated, non-navigable waters would receive the full protection of the Clean Water Act. On mining, their goal is to throw up as many regulatory hurdles as possible. MSHA's mine dust regulation provides yet another example of the administration's war on coal as it attempts to limit coal mining. Simply put, MSHA is proposing a standard for respirable dust that cannot be met. On burning coal, they seem intent on punishing any utility who dares to burn coal. Perhaps the most expansive and most visible attack on the coal industry over the last 3 years has been the administration's efforts to drastically curtail the percentage of our electricity that is generated from coal. Electricity prices are going to go up and the electric grid will be stretched even further, posing serious challenges for reliability. Last but not least is the issue for me for coal fly ash. The fly ash residue from coal combustion is used as a cement substitute in our cement block plant. The prospect of hazardous material designation puts this type of use in jeopardy. On top of it all, I fully expect the second Obama term would focus on cap and trade. While the president is following through on his promise to enact cap and trade by regulation, his allies in the Senate haven't given up on legislation. I expect them to try and move climate legislation next year. I would like to say this about CO2. One of my customers operates large industrial-sized greenhouses in Michigan and Canada. In order to promote quicker growth, they operate large CO2 generators, which raise the concentration of CO2 in the greenhouses from 340 parts per million, which is the ambient, to over 1,000 parts per million. All of this CO2 is absorbed by the plants. I don't believe that CO2 is really an issue in the natural world. Mr. Chairman, I would also like to briefly mention that the administration is not the only player on the war on coal. Well-funded environmental groups have done everything in their power to kill coal in America. For example, one of America's largest environmental groups teamed up with one of America's largest natural gas producers on the so-called Beyond Coal campaign. In fact, it was recently discovered that the natural gas company donated $26 million to the environmental group in a joint effort to destroy the coal industry. This alliance was not to be, however, as the same environmental group just announced a new campaign entitled Beyond Natural Gas. Mr. Chairman, the war on coal is real and is doing tremendous damage to our industry. The Obama administration and its environmental allies are doing everything they can to stop coal from being permitted, to make it uneconomical to mine, and to stop utilities from burning it, and to discourage the use of the byproducts for beneficial uses. This is a highly coordinated, aggressive effort to literally destroy the industry by attacking coal at every point of its life cycle. The Obama administration's war on coal is a tragedy for the coal industry and the thousands of Americans that our industry employs and who rely on us to provide affordable electricity. On behalf of myself, the East Fairfield Coal Company, and many thousands of people in our region who rely on coal for their livelihoods, thank you for supporting and conducting vigorous oversight of the Obama administration's war on coal. I have to remind you, though, that if definitive action is not taken to reverse the above referenced policies, this industry is going to be in deep, deep trouble. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to answering any questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mackel. You mentioned some of the environmental groups who also are fighting this, attacking coal, but in the end, it's the administration. The buck stops with them, and they make the rules, they implement the law, they pass the policies. So I want to go to you, Mr. Hodenbussy. You have an undergraduate degree from Cleveland State University in chemical engineering.
Yes, that's correct.
And you have a master's degree in chemical engineering as well.
Yes, that's correct.
And I believe you said you've worked in this field for 40 years.
Well,
Almost 40.
almost 40. 39.
Yeah, 39 years, and all that at the Ohio EPA.
Yes.
So you started, and I'm looking at your resume, your biographical information. You started in 1973.
That's correct.
So you worked for Republicans and Democrats. You worked for all kinds of folks.
Yes.
And you've interacted with the federal EPA for those 39 years.
Yes.
I mean, think about that. That's so if I get this right, that's Nixon, that's Ford, that's Carter, that's Reagan, that's Bush, that's Clinton, that's Bush, and now Obama. So you don't look that old, but that's a lot of experience working with both sides of the aisle. In that time, in that 39 plus years, working with all those administrations and the various governors, both Republican and Democrat, have you ever seen an administration who has this much animosity towards coal?
Mr. Chairman, overall, this current administration is promulgating more rules that directly affect coal than any time in the history of the Clean Air Act and the Environmental Protection Agency.
So the unprecedented actions we have seen in the 3.5 years of this administration and that 39 years of experience you've had with the various, both Republican and Democrat administration, you've never seen it like this.
Yes, that's correct.
And have you, I'm just curious, I don't know the answer to this, have you ever testified before in that 39 years of experience? Have you ever participated in hearings like this?
Yes, I have. In the U.S. Senate, I testified once.
And who was president at that time when you testified?
I do not know who was president. It had to do with air permitting.
Okay.
That was the issue.
So 39 years of your service. This is the first time you've testified and talked about the nature of the rules being promulgated and enforced by an administration.
Yes.
And you would agree with the title of today's hearing. You talk about the green agenda and the war on coal. Do you think that's an accurate title? Do you think there's actually a war on coal that we're seeing from the Obama administration?
Well,
I mean, I know these guys would, but I'm curious what
right,
you think.
right, and I didn't use that term war on
No,
coal.
I know we did. That was the title we put on the hearing. I'm asking if you agree with it.
That is more a term, I'm going to say a term that was used in a political sense. I don't try to go down that line, but you can just look at the rules that have been promulgated, what the effect is, both in terms of direct coal mines or the users.
I'm forgetting my Ohio history. Who was governor in 1973? Who was our governor then? Was it?
It was Gilligan.
So when you first were hired at the Ohio EPA, it was the Democratic administration that you were hired in under, is that right?
Right, I was Governor Gilligan.
Okay. And I'm just curious, and I'm running low on time, and I want to get to our three other members who are more the experts on the whole coal industry. The blackout that we've just been hearing about in the news in India, I don't know, and I've not heard what the cause of it, but I'm just curious your thoughts on that, and if something like that can happen here in the United States, if we continue this effort to make it difficult to use coal to meet our electric and energy needs. And I'll start with you, and then we'll go down the line, and I'll yield to Mr.
Just quickly, I read about the blackout in India yesterday, but instead of having it better, I heard on the radio today it's gotten worse. Instead of 300 million people without power, it's now up to 600 million people without power. Can it happen in this country? Well, I think we've experienced some blackouts in 2008. Maybe it was a little earlier in Ohio and in the East Coast. So it has happened here, and it is certainly something to be concerned with.
Great.
Again, part of my testimony, I submitted the article from the Columbus Dispatch that talks about the units that are going to be shut down during the last heat wave. They are in use. So where is that power going to come from? How are we going to replace it to keep the electricity going?
Okay. Let me just real quick for the other three witnesses, and I think I know the answer to this, but the title of today's hearing is Green Agenda and the War on Coal. Would you agree that that's an accurate description of what's going on, Representative?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I do think it is kind of unprecedented because administrations in the past at the federal level would have had a mutual interest, seemingly, in having inexpensive energy. You know, energy independence has been a goal for this country since the beginning of time. But President Carter started the Energy Department with the stated goal to try to have energy independence. And it seems as though this administration is driving us in the opposite direction. We're going to be more and more dependent on other sources of energy, more expensive sources of energy, and probably from hostile countries. So I think that that's a problem, and it's clearly there is a war on coal, and we're feeling the effects of it already.
Yeah, Mr. Ahern, you deal with electric co-ops all over the state. Would you agree with the title of today's hearing, the War on Coal?
I think probably the greenhouse gas rule that the EPA has proposed for new units is probably the signature event that declares war on coal, because it's a standard that the demonstrated technology is not available in order to meet that.
Yeah. Mr. Michael?
Well, I obviously agree very much, and I would point out that Ohio's success in the past has been from coal-fired electricity, providing economical power for industry. And with the proposals that they have now, what industry are we going to have left in Ohio?
Yeah.
I mean, it's an attack on the economy, not just on coal.
And remember the title, we said the Green Agenda and the War on Coal, because it's both. There's a war on coal, and you've all made that clear. And we have a gentleman who has 40 years experience with the Ohio EPA who understands how different this administration is from previous administration. But it's also the Green Agenda. Recognize this. I believe Mr. McKinley brought up Secretary Chu at the Department of Energy. The loan guarantee program at the Department of Energy, they took $26 billion of taxpayer money, $16 billion of taxpayer money, gave it to 26 companies. 22 of those companies that got your money, this is Solyndra, this is Beacon Power, this is Abound Solar, 3 companies that went bankrupt, gave them your money. 22 of those 26 companies had a credit rating of BB-. Mr. Makel, you're in business, you know what that means. That means it was junk. No one would invest in it, but it was okay to give them your money. So not only, this is that insult to injury, not only are they got a war on coal, but they're also saying, oh, by the way, the tax money you do send to us, we're going to take it and give it to your competitors. Meanwhile, 3 of them are going bankrupt, and 22 of the 26 companies that got your money would have never got any money in the private sector because they weren't a good risk. That's what's going on with this administration. So when Mr. Hodenbosi says that he's never seen it like he has with this administration, it's true. We got all the facts to point it out. And so we, again, want to thank you all for being here. And I went over time, so the gentleman from Ohio will get extra time. Mr. Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hodenbosi, as in your background and with your experience, do you think that the EPA has an agenda that it's trying to effectuate by the promulgating of regulations that specifically impact the coal industry?
I think it's pretty clear that that all the rules that are coming out are overall specifically designed to certainly restrict the use of coal.
Okay. And in your experience, the Vice President came through Ohio not too long ago, touting a resurgence in manufacturing, at the same time that the administration has got an all-out attack on the very energy sources to fuel any kind of resurgence in manufacturing. How do we fuel a resurgence in manufacturing if the EPA and the administration persists with this attempt to shut down the coal industry? Where's the power going to come from to fuel manufacturing plants?
Well, that remains a concern of not just Ohio EPA, but the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio on the rules that were promulgated. Both agencies filed comments to that extent. In order for us to have a strong industrial base, we need to have inexpensive electric power. That's just the bottom line. And if the costs go up too much, we will lose some of our heavy manufacturing to companies that move overseas where the power is cheaper.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. McCall, uncertainty is one of the big issues that businesses talk to us about these days, and the uncertainty around the regulatory process and the EPA's actions. How has uncertainty created by the EPA and the Clean Water Act permitting process harmed your ability to expand your business and create jobs?
Across the coal fields today, the uncertainty, especially with the election ahead of us and so on, most companies that I know of, maybe all companies that I know of, have stopped considering to make any further purchases of mining equipment because, what are we going to do if Obama goes another 4 years? I feel my company will have a very difficult time continuing in the coal business. So I'm not going to buy any new equipment. So it's starting to really stop the economy, and I think that's another reason why we see the slow growth across the country today. So much uncertainty with their economic policies.
Well, if you knew about the uncertainty, the red tape, and the costs of EPA regulations and acquiring permits, would you still have gone into the coal mining business?
I have to answer that by going back into my coal miners. They're wonderful people, and I suppose I would have retired a long time ago if it wasn't for them. But there's a lot of great, intelligent, hardworking young coal miners that need jobs, and they'll never find jobs like this again. And it's really the only reason I continue is for them.
As a coal operator, what would you say to a company or an individual that's trying to invest in new coal mining operations today? Would based on what you know and the impacts that the EPA and their regulations or the administration is having on the coal industry, would you invest in new coal mining operations today?
Not in the United States of America. I mean, why mine anything in the United States of America today? In fact, one of the points that they made with Solyndra is that China controls all the rare earths. So they're going to control many of the manufacturing anyway. So I guess today we need to invest in coal mines in India and China. They're going to lead the country's, the world's economy if we continue with Obama's policies.
Sure. I appreciate your responding to those questions. Representative Thompson, first of all, I appreciate you being here, and I enjoy working with you. We cover a lot of the same territory in our respective districts, and I know that you are a passionate advocate for the coal industry as well. Can you give us a sense of how coal production affects the economy of your specific area that you represent?
Yes, thank you, Congressman. And I appreciate working with you very closely as well. As you well know, we have a lot of communities depend upon the revenue that's generated by these utility plants that are burning coal. Several school systems in our district right now are very, very concerned about the shutdown of these utility plants and what it's going to mean to their revenue sources. We have so many people who are working in the mining business, particularly Noble, Washington. Monroe County is huge. So these are real individuals. These are real communities. These are real people. And they count on coal for that certainty. We talked about uncertainty. That there's a tremendous palpable sense of dread right now. And as I discussed in my testimony, as we go around to county fairs, and I know you're experiencing this as well, people just say, please stand up for coal. Please do something. Please see what you can do to stop what's going on in Washington with these regulatory agencies, because everybody's got a family story. My uncle was in coal. My granddad owned a coal company. That future may not exist for people going forward, just because of the uncertainty, because of this deliberate attempt to eliminate this energy source. And we're not going to have that baseload power we need. We need that baseload power to make Ohio's economy go. And Ohio can't be open for business if we're shutting down coal.
We talk about the effect on the consumer and on business. Let's look at it from a different perspective. You know, the state requires revenue to function as well, to conduct its business. As a state representative, one of your legislative responsibilities is to help craft a budget for the state of Ohio. If coal production in the state continues to suffer more, what would be the effect on state revenues and on the budget? What would have to be done to counter the effects of the diminished revenues?
Well, it's a huge impact. I don't have a specific figure for you, Congressman, but I think, you know, again, it's a reliable source. We count on the jobs that it generates. We count on the jobs that it facilitates when we have inexpensive energy in the state of Ohio. And you eliminate that component of coal. Obviously, we're excited about some of the shale things that are going on right now, but you also need a competition between the two. You need that vibrant market that keeps rates down, keeps them cost effective. And so our budget is additional uncertainty for our budget, obviously, if we're shutting down those plants because of the income tax that it generates, the sales tax that it generates. There's so much investment. We talked about those 11 additional jobs that each coal job relates to and creates and supports. So we need that basic undergirding of the economy, or else Ohio's going to be in desperate straits. And it was a struggle this year to try and solve an $8 billion budget hole. It's going to get a lot tougher if we don't have coal as an inexpensive energy source in Ohio, because it impacts throughout the entire economy.
Because it's actually a trickle-down effect. It's not just the income taxes that the coal operators provide and the coal mining operations themselves provide, but it's also the manufacturing companies that are dependent upon energy that will shut down as a result of not having affordable energy. I mean, it's a really big impact.
It is. Heavy equipment manufacturers, they count on the coal industry. Trucking companies, the people that provide equipment, clothing, housing, everything else. It's vitally important, and the sense of uncertainty in eastern Ohio is really strong right now, and I understand that. I mean, it's heartbreaking to hear about people who are being laid off, and we talked about Monroe County as well. Ormet is a critical component there. Beyond Ormet, there's not a lot going on there that's positive economically, and we want to see them continue and be strengthened.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, if you would indulge me for just one more question. Mr. Ahern, if regulations prevent or seriously limit a co-op from burning coal, how will the underserved in rural areas like we represent here along the Ohio River, how will they receive their electricity?
Well, it would probably be from other sources that are likely to be more expensive.
Okay, so you're talking about people that are already struggling day to day, unemployment in many places still in double digits, and yet they're going to have to pay higher utility rates to power their homes, and it's even going to have a further crippling effect on those businesses that operate in those rural areas, because as their cost to provide power to their manufacturing and business operations, they're going to have to probably lose people, not hire people, correct?
Chairman Jordan and Representative Johnson, I think, right now natural gas is relatively inexpensive, and it is helping to hold down electricity prices. But once people turn away from coal, and the only reasonable place you can turn to for base load generation is natural gas. Natural gas prices are going to rise significantly, and it is going to raise electricity prices for Ohio and many other areas of the country. They're going to see significant price increases. And as Mr. Hodenbolsky has already mentioned, we're going to lose some generating capacity that with today's very low natural gas prices Nobody will build anything today. You won't build a combustion turbine at today's low wholesale power prices because of low natural gas prices. And so we're gonna wind the spring and do nothing. And then when that spring lets go, we're not gonna have enough electricity, and it is gonna drive up the price, and people are gonna feel it, businesses are gonna feel it.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. In your questioning, you brought out the jobs that are associated with the coal industry and the positive impact that has on communities and school districts. And we'd like to recognize one gentleman who's also with us. I see Mr. Murray is with us, of Murray Energy, and of course, they employ a lot of folks and have a lot of positive impact on countless number of communities across this state and across the country. So we appreciate him being with us today. And with that, I would recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you all for being here. One of the things that I was looking at, and when we walked in, I walked in with one of the gentlemen in the industry. Because we take for granted this idea that you can just flip a switch and the lights come on. You can hit the switch at night and the air conditioning comes on, and in the winter you just up the thermostat a little bit and the house gets warmer and the lights get lit. The fragility, though, of this grid and the inability to keep it at a level, the base load. Any of you, please explain that, because I think that hearings like this are great because the general public doesn't understand how fragile this is. We start talking about brownouts and blackouts. The fact that we haven't had any absolutely amazes me right now, what we've been doing. But just the startup, you just can't start them back up again. Once these plants shut down, you don't start them back up again that easy. Am I right or wrong on that? And any of you can answer. You all are very, Mr. Rader.
Chairman Jordan and Representative Kelly, yeah, you're right. The grid it's not a real stable system in terms of it doesn't tolerate upsets very well. And a great example of that is August of 2003 when there was a disruption due to problems in northeast and northern Ohio. And we ended up with a blackout that blacked out 55 million people that went from Ohio to Michigan, around the north side of Lake Erie, across upstate New York, and down to New York City. So the grid is very, it is not self-correcting in that way. You've got to maintain the voltage, you've got to maintain the frequency to keep it stable.
Interesting, then. Yeah. So the importance of the grid, and we all agree how critical it is. We put $16 billion in green energy. How much of an investment have we made in the grid? Is there any emphasis on? See, I never hear that. I always hear about renewables and the way we're going to go with renewables. That seems to be the push that this administration has.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Kelly, one of the things I think that is not really appreciated broadly is that the only reason the grid is there is because it is being maintained. The idea that we have an antiquated infrastructure, I reject that idea. There is, it's cared for, it's taken care of. Sure, we've seen deficiencies, but there, you've got FERC, you've got NERC, you've got state commissions, you've got the individuals, utilities themselves, you've got regional transmission organizations, and for Ohio, you've got PJM. There is a tremendous amount of focus going on to maintain the grid. Now, one of the things that the green agenda is doing that is going to present challenges to the grid is that the two major sources of power that they seem to strongly advocate are wind and solar, and they're intermittent resources that they can come up quickly, but more importantly, they can come down quickly. Clouds can shield a solar field, the wind can die off rather quickly, and those dramatic changes, the rest of the grid has to really hustle to keep the voltage and the current in line. Otherwise, the system will go unstable, as the blackout of 2003 shows, the blackout of 1965, and other regional blackouts that have occurred.
It's amazing to me. We rely on sun that may not shine and wind that may not blow, and then we turn our back on all the other stuff we know, which is right beneath the surface. And that is really amazing to me, that an administration that many people would say these are the smartest guys. Well, I don't know, when you run a business 1.7 trillion in the red every year, I don't know that I go to any of those guys for any business advice. One of the things I do want to point out, and I think you'd all agree with, while we face a global market that's out there for us all, We may never ever get to a point where we can compete on an hourly wage, but we can compete when our energy costs are lower than every other place in the world. So while you have wages that allow us to have a sustainable life form and a way of life that we like, we can offset it by lower energy costs, can we not? I mean, that's part of the formula of what drives the cost of a product, either up or down. And I look at this and I said, you know what, if we're ever in a fair fight, shame on us. With what we have at our disposal, and we put our men and women in a situation where they can't absolutely blow everybody else away, what are we thinking about? This is not the type of a country that I know and how it grew into its greatness. We have it, it's here. I said earlier, it's affordable, it's abundant, and it's accessible. Why in the world will we ever turn our back on what we know and how we can offset the rising cost of wages that our people need and put ourselves in jeopardy? It makes absolutely no sense. Mr. Makel, I know that your company is doing a great job, and Mr. Murray's company is doing a great job. Why is there this war on coal? Why?
I have no understanding. It makes no sense to me. It's all over a phony CO2 issue, which I mentioned in my speech that, you know, my greenhouse customer totally disproves the science. And I don't understand. But I do know that all these plants they wanted to close, you know, right now, including 2 that I supply, 2 GenOn plants, they're slated to close, but they're running right now, or our grid wouldn't be functioning right now. There's no other source of electricity. Every available source of electricity is running right now to keep the country alive, you know, electricity grid working. And without them,
I mean, it's baffling, is it not? Representative, I mean, I think there's some confusion sometimes. We think that the government is somehow just this benevolent monarch that showers on the people all these gifts, but the reality of it is every single penny that the government uses comes out of a hardworking American taxpayer's pocket. Now, unfortunately, only about half of us are paying taxes anymore, but please explain, because I think that these type of hearings allow the community to understand every single penny that Ohio needs. Where does it come from?
Chairman Jordan, Representative Kelly, well, it comes from people who are actually working. And I think the way that Ohio goes to work is Ohio has reasonable priced energy. That energy is supplied to the manufacturers. The manufacturers put people to work. They put people to work in mining coal. They put people to work in transporting it and shipping it and delivering it. And I think that's the green agenda. I think which concerns me the most is it's almost an article of faith. It's an alternative to religion, to the one that we understand, and it's a religion where they disdain fossil fuels. They consider fossil fuels to be the enemy of our health and our safety and our way of life. And if you look at California's energy policy, you'll see what America's is going to look like shortly. It's a mess. They disdain the energy sources that we know are reliable. They're increasingly trying to rely on wind and solar, which can't be effectively stored, can't be transmitted very well. And so it just makes this economy much more problematic. It increases the uncertainty. And we have 200 years of proven reserves of coal. Why aren't we doing everything possible to invest in that? If we need to make it cleaner, let's invest in clean coal technology. We have the ability to do that. And as we do that, again, we get all the benefits that we're seeking. We've got reliable reserves, and we know we can produce it cost effectively. And that goes right into the economy, and it makes Ohio vibrant, because it's an advantage for Ohio, not just for the nation. Right here in Ohio, we have very inexpensive energy sources that can power the manufacturing sector, the comeback that we'd all like to see.
No, I got to tell you, I know the struggles you go through. Pennsylvania's doing the same thing. I think all of us sit back, and it's one of these things you scratch your head, you kind of raise your shoulders, and you just keep asking why. I do not know. After watching this current administration when they were running for office, they absolutely have kept their word to the American people, and they have certainly kept their word to coal. And I still, for the life of me, I just keep asking why, and nobody can ever answer that to me. Why do you want to do this? And I guess the answer is for all of us is because they can. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman for his good question. I want to pick on one thing real quickly before yielding to Congressman McKinley. Mr. Ahern, when you and Congressman Kelly were dialoguing, you mentioned that you think the grid is maintained, but if I want to make sure I got this accurately. You said with the focus you're seeing from this administration on wind and solar, you think the likelihood of blackouts and the likelihood to maintain that quality grid is somewhat jeopardized. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, I would say, it's close, I would say it this way more specifically. It's going to be a great challenge to put more intermittent resources onto the grid and maintain the reliability. It's a bigger challenge. I'm not saying it's
So the
impossible.
conclusion is the potential for blackouts, in fact, is greater with this unreliability of wind and solar being added to the mix.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. It's a
Right.
great possibility.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Gentleman from West Virginia is recognized. And we're pretty liberal here on this side right now. That's not the first time anyone's ever said I'm liberal. But we'll give you 6-7 minutes there or longer if you need time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ahern, you mentioned in your remarks about fly ash. And for those people that aren't aware, that's an unavoidable byproduct of burning coal. Just like if you have a log in your fireplace, you get an ash, and if you burn coal, you get an ash. And the EPA, since '09, has been contemplating and developing and perfecting a piece of legislation, a new rule and reg, that would potentially classify fly ash as a hazardous material. We know that fly ash is used in concrete, it's used in brick and block. We know it's used in drywall. We know it's used in bowling balls. It's used in ceramic tile. It's used in a variety of beneficial recyclable uses. What are you doing at Cardinal? What are you doing with the fly ash there?
Mr. Chairman and Representative McKinley, most of the fly ash at Cardinal, we store it on site long term. Although we do sell some of the fly ash, there are certain products. So, for example, you mentioned bowling balls. There's a certain part of the fly ash that's very very small, spherical, hollow particles that are great for making plastics of improved quality and things like that. One of the other things that's not fly ash directly, but it's indicative of the effort that we go to, our scrubber, the sulfur dioxide gets converted to gypsum, calcium sulfate. Can be used for drywall. Over half of the gypsum we produce at the Cardinal station is put on a barge and taken downriver to a drywall plant made into drywall. So we look for avenues. Much of the bottom ash has a different character than the fly ash. It's a great aggregate for concrete.
But if it becomes Mr. Ahern, if it becomes a hazardous material, don't you think the consumers will? I know that there's studies that said across America there are 316,000 jobs involved in the recycling of coal ash and gypsum. All of those would be in jeopardy, wouldn't it, if the EPA has its way with the coal ash rule?
Mr. Chairman, Representative McKinley, it would be a huge problem if fly ash was declared hazardous, because just the laws that would apply to the way you have to protect workers, clothe them, ventilators, things like that, what we'd have to do to our handling systems and
Have
things like that.
you been able to project at all what the cost to the consumer could be? And because that would be passed along through the Public Service Commission, that cost. Do we have a sense of what that could be to the consumers if they persist in making this a hazardous material?
Mr. Chairman, Representative McKinley, we do not have a good cost estimate of what the impact would be.
Okay, let me move on to there was another comment about, I think it was Mr. Mackel, about the new performance standards, new source performance standards. I think, did you not make that in your remarks about that? That's again, I think some more people across America need to understand what that's all about. The mercury standard was to go back to the old plants to bring them to compliance, but under this new performance standard, this is for all the potentially new coal-fired generating plants. This would be their rule that would put them in a bind. And the real crux of that, as I understand, is coming down to the carbon capture and sequestration or carbon capture and utilization processes that could be available. I think you mentioned and others have said that we probably have, that technology, as we know, is currently not available. It may not be available for 10 years or more, but yet the EPA is is promulgating this rule. We have a hearing. We just put a bill in last week. I'm honored. I know that Representative Johnson's on that bill with me and others in Congress. We're going to try to get that rule held back until there is technology commercially available. In other words, they can set it up, but until there is a commercially available, that rule can't be enforced. And we think that's a realistic response to this effort. And we just got word yesterday that the leadership is going to have a hearing on that in September. So for those of you that have an interest in that legislation, watch in Washington for September when we have the opportunity to be able to understand more how the EPA has got ahead of the curve here and not using science, but is using ideology as their driving force. So again, I thank you all for being here today, and I hope to see you again in September. Thank you. I yield back my time.
Thank you, gentlemen. Now, we'll go quickly a second round here. We'll start with the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Hodenbosi, I want to turn a little bit to the issue of the effects of these regulations on the supply of electricity. You've heard talk a little bit about reliability. From a reliability standpoint, how do you think Ohio coal-fired power plants will be able to comply with utility MAC and provide electricity during peak hours, such as in a heat wave like we have had here in Ohio recently?
Well, it's, I guess the issue is not so much the plants that are operating and can comply. Mr. Ahern talked about the Cardinal plant and the expense that he believes his plant can comply. So we will have some facilities that will be able to comply. The issue is all of the facilities that are closing and are not going to be in operation. Where are we going to get that capacity from to make up when we need the electricity?
Well, let's turn to that issue. How many electricity generating units have already been prematurely retired as a result of utility MAC? And do you have any idea how many are projected?
Well, there are 25 specific boilers that are shutting down as a result of the utility MAC and other EPA requirements that have been announced. And that's about over 5,000 megawatts of capacity that will be gone in the next 3 years.
I know that you sit in a regulatory agency, so I don't know how many businesses you talk to, but do you have any sense of the direct effects of increased electricity prices as a result of EPA's air regulations? Are companies laying off workers and shutting down businesses?
Well, there certainly is a direct impact when electricity rates go up. The example of Representative Thompson of Ormet that is just down the river, the aluminum producer, that they have laid off some workers, and if the price of electricity continues to go up, that will be the course there, and that is a huge employer in Ohio.
Okay. Mr. Ahern, will regulations like the utility MAC increase the cost of electricity that you provide to your customers? And what implications does this have? Now, we've dealt with this a little bit, but I want to give you a chance to expound on it. What implications does this have for economic growth and job creation in rural areas like your company serves?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Johnson, it's unclear to us exactly how the utility MAC might expose us to additional costs. We're hoping that it doesn't, but as I mentioned previously, one of the big uncertainties is the monitoring requirements. Mercury is just so dilute in concentration that it is extremely difficult to measure. And what sort of testing requirements will they have? What sort of testing frequencies? Tests can, particularly with very dilute concentrations, can sometimes you can actually be performing well, but the test will raise doubt, and so you could be required to spend a lot of money on testing, a lot of money on monitoring equipment. Overall, it's difficult to say exactly how it's going to impact us, but as I described, the accomplishments that we've had so far have added up to $1 billion of capital cost and $20 a month for the average consumer. We don't think like it's appropriate to add any more costs on top of that, because our customers have already paid for a significant improvement in air quality.
Well, do rural cooperatives like yours, do you have reliability concerns about the utility MAC compliance, particularly during peak hours?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Johnson, anytime you do anything to it can affect the whole electric system, everybody that's connected to it is potentially impacted. And even though our plants may be fine, may be well controlled, may meet the standards, if others around us retire, if there are reliability problems because a lot of generation is taken out, we will be impacted in probably the most direct and costly way of the possibility of blackouts.
Okay, all right. And if the co-op wants to build a new coal-fired power plant, will it be able to, given the new source performance standard for greenhouse gas emissions?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Johnson, I don't see how with the proposed greenhouse gas standard anyone could take on the task of building a new coal plant.
Okay, all right. Representative Thompson, let's come back to you. We talked a little bit before about the effect of reduced coal production on state revenues, but what about local government revenues? I know you and I, we talk to a lot of local government folks that are struggling to fund their sewer upgrades, their water upgrades, also a part of a regulatory process that's being mandated on them. And yet they don't have the funds to be able to do that. What effect on local governments would this diminished revenues as a result of lower production and use of coal have?
Mr. Chairman, Congressman Johnson, I think, again, in kind of a more of a micro way, they count on all the local jobs, the people that are paying income tax. They count on the services that are used locally by these coal companies and the utility companies. So they're very much, their base revenue sources are very much dependent on these companies. And again, we talked about local government, we talked about schools that are going to be suffering, school districts. And in many cases, the utilities are partners with local charities and things. So there's so much, it radiates through so much of that local economy, and it's obviously very tough for local governments right now because of revenue at the state level and also at the local level. So any variable that you introduce into that equation is really going to harm them in a significant way. And this is something that doesn't have to happen. This is something that is happening in Washington by design. And this war on coal and this disdain for, again, our electric utilities and also our coal producers and the livelihoods that are dependent upon it, it's a huge impact. And you and I are experiencing it. We hear it. And as I said, the discussions and the palpable fear in local communities is on the rise. And I hope we can turn this back. I hope we can reverse this. A lot of it's underway, and it's hard to get bureaucracies to move in the right direction. But I appreciate what this committee is doing to call attention to it, and I'll do everything I can in the state of Ohio to be of help.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Great. Now recognize Mr. Keller for a second round.
Thank you, Chairman. One of the things we talked about, Mr. Ahern, was the grid. When I'm back in Western Pennsylvania and I get a chance to visit with the folks I represent, I go into a lot of the people that do the machinists. And I talked to one of my friends up in Meadville, and he was saying, hey, are you guys going to get this thing taken care of with the grid? Are you guys going to do something about this? Because the problem I have is that, I can't afford the surge. I said, what do you mean the surge? He goes, well, I can't turn these machines on and then have there be a dip in the power, because then I have to go back and restart and recalibrate and everything. He said, you know the cost of doing that? I said, no, I absolutely have no idea the cost. He said, well, I'll tell you what, it's going to put us out of business. the reliability of the grid is also one of those things that is absolutely critical. So, Mr. Aaron, when we talk about all these different alternative uses, really only, I mean, you look at what we've done with coal over the years. I'm talking about something that's so consistent and so reliable and so affordable. What's the purpose in all that? I know you talk a little about the grid keeping up, but the reality of it is these surges also really affect these businesses and their ability to power up their machines. So, how often do you see that? I mean, it's going to become more and more prevalent, I would think.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Kelly, you bring up a very good point, and it is part of the evolution of technology. There is so much greater use of electronics and electronic controls and things like that, much more than there were decades ago. And this is the kind of equipment that is not very tolerant of even a fraction of a second blip in the voltage or the frequency. And so it's more and more important that the grid reliability be maintained. I'll tell you from my experience, the utilities know how to maintain grid reliability. They know what needs to be done. It's not rocket science, but it's fundamentals. You've got to have enough grid, you've got to have enough transmission, you've got to have enough generators, and you've got to deal with the upsets. And as I mentioned before, the biggest problem that I see challenge coming for the grid is intermittent resources growing to be a larger and larger percentage of the supply, which is going to introduce an environment that's not the norm that they're used to, and there's going to be a learning curve, and during that learning curve, there's probably going to be problems.
Okay, but it doesn't make sense to me for us to go away from something we already know. Now, maybe you can help out with it. My friends in the business tell me about the secondary power sources, how you have the backups. It's almost like guys that run these big diesel trucks. They go in to grab a cup of coffee or lunch. They don't shut them down. They leave them run because it's cheaper to leave them run than it is to shut them down and start them back up again. And that's what I keep going to with this grid and the availability, that you have this backup system in place so when you have the dip, the other kicks in, so you don't have those surges. And this is what bothers me, is we keep shutting down these plants, these coal-powered electric producing plants. There is a dire effect that happens in the industry with this. So, I mean, a guy like me that sells cars and trucks, I get it. I know why the guys need their diesels running. What I can't understand is why the government wants to shut down our most reliable source of electric generation. I don't get it. Is there something I'm not getting? I mean,
Mr. Chairman, Representative Kelly, I think you are getting it. It's just very important to maintain the reliability. Now, the basic way that the grid operator, which today is, in our region of the country, is PJM, they have the oversight of all the transmission. They are the ones that give dispatch orders to the generators, pick up, drop off. They always keep some generators at part load so that they're prepared to pick up load or to reject load. And it is, as Mr. Hodenbosi has mentioned, when some of these coal plants get taken out over the next few years, we're entering a new environment. And as I mentioned previously, hardly any new generation is being built today because wholesale power prices are so low that nobody sees an opportunity for a good investment to be made. And this is even more so in states that have chosen to go to a greater use of markets. And Ohio was one of those for the investor-owned utilities, competitive markets and market suppliers. And a lot of these marketers, they're sharp business people, and they say, well, I don't want to build a new plant today because I don't know that 5 years from now that there isn't going to be overbuilding. So that's another new element that we now have that we didn't have before, which is another urge for caution and not to go with full abandon in the direction that we're going.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, Mr. Jordan, I've sat in a number of these hearings, and one of the things I find absolutely astounding is that we would pour $16 billion into renewables, and you know what that does? That sends a signal to the private investors. They want to put that money in themselves until the government said, well, we'll underwrite it. You don't have to worry about that. So then they put their money in, and we found out the law then, as soon as they saw what was going on, they were voting with their feet. They got out of that investment so fast when they found out that this stuff was going upside down, it wasn't going to be subsidized by the American taxpayers. And it's amazing to me that we've turned our back on a lot of the things that we have. And again, I keep going back to this because I still keep asking myself why. Why are we abandoning a source that's been so reliable, provides so many jobs, provides so much revenue to run this country, and turning our backs on it and saying, well, we'll try this other stuff. It just doesn't make any sense. It's a waste of taxpayer money. So I thank you for being here. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll go to Mr. McKinley for a short round if we can, and then we're going to get to our second panel.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. We spent a lot of time here today talking, and I think it seems like the majority of questions had to do with utility companies and what it's going to do to the consumers and businesses. But I think we have to be equally cognizant of the mining industry. So, Mr. McElroy, I want to focus some of my attention to you a little bit right now because we know the rules, the utility MAC, the air transport rules, we know all that, the new ports performance standards, we know what it's going to do with utility. So let's go back to where the men and women in the mines, where they're going to produce the coal. What I've looked at is a series of things that we have. Bill Johnson has worked very hard. I've seen him work the floor on the stream buffer rule. That's going to open up opportunities for that. We have the water permitting, the water conductivity. That we can now find there's 6 bottled waters in America that if we went to a mine site and we drank this water and poured some of it on the ground, we would be in violation of the EPA water conductivity standards. That just is incredible with what it's doing to our industry. We've got the use of fly ash is being proposed not to be able to allow to be used as a buffer on acid mine runoff. We've got the roadblocks that the Sierra Club and others are trying to put up about shipping coal overseas. If we can't burn it in America, perhaps someone else across can do it and put our men and women back to work with it. So my question to you would be, I guess, given that all of these series, and I'm sure there are more that it's from your industry. I'm not in the coal industry, but what actions of the EPA do you think have been the most onerous and the ones that you would say if Congress could focus on one issue when we go back between now and the end of the year, which would be the one that would affect the mine industry that should be reversed first?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I mean, we've talked about all the different ways we're being attacked, and they're all important. And the cumulative effect of all of them is what's really significant. I mean, to get a permit it's a ridiculous, tremendous maze that you have to go through. And I'm convinced that there's a lot of the people in the bureaucracy that don't want to give us a permit. They have embraced this war on coal. And they don't want us to have permits. So they throw up even more personal roadblocks in the middle of the process that we spent years just trying to get, whether it's Army Corps permits or mining permits are getting a little better in Ohio now finally, but it's, the cumulative effect of the whole thing is what's difficult.
What would you think would be the most, you've got a group of individuals here today that are focused on trying to push back on this war on coal to get some common sense. I'm one of 2 engineers in Congress, so I'm trying to use my background in that I want to make sure that I'm fighting based on science, but I need to know what your priority is. So I'm trying to hear from you, what would be your top priority? First bill to get repealed.
Our most important issue, I guess, focuses on our customers. We've lost many, many customers over the years that have quit burning coal, and I want to make sure that our customers continue to burn, coal. It amazes me when I see the records and when I see how clean the air is. I've never seen the air so clean. It used to be in Pittsburgh, it was a horrible mess. And Cleveland, it was a big mess, and Youngstown was a big mess. The air is so clean now, we've accomplished so much that I don't want any more regulations to impact the customer base that's left that we can sell coal to. We can at least deal with the other regulations as long as we have a customer left at the end of the day. If there is no customer, then why even fight it? So.
Thank you. You're back my time.
I thank the gentlemen. I want to thank our panel. Let me just mention one maybe question here. Just to dispel this idea that this is nonpartisan. I mean, I think it's been clear based on what we've heard, that this administration is different. Different than previous Republican administrations, different than previous Democrat administration. And this is not brought on any partisan basis. This is just the fact that this administration is, in fact, engaging in a war on the coal industry and has this green initiative. Mr. Maple, I bet that you employ both Republicans and Democrats in your business. Is that accurate?
We don't ask that question.
I know you don't ask. And I won't ask you which one you are either.
I would guess we're 98% Republican.
Yeah. But I mean, some of the guys that work for in your organization, I'm sure people who work in the coal mining industry aren't all Republicans, is that right?
No, they're not.
Yeah, you make a distinction about it. Mr. Ahern, in the cooperatives that you represent in Buckeye Power, I'm sure you got both parties in your organization.
Certainly do.
Yeah, and Mr. Thompson, my memory serves me right, your district was, for many years, been represented by Democrats in the General Assembly. So when you're out talking with constituents, I bet you've had Democrats come up to you and say they're just as concerned about what this administration is doing to coal as you are.
Very much.
As Republicans are.
It's not a partisan issue. We just want to allow people to continue to work, and they can't do that with this war on coal.
And Mr. Hodenbuzzy, we determined in the first round of questioning with you that you've been in this business for almost 40 years. Worked for, if I got my history right, Gilligan, Rhodes, Celeste, Winovich, Strickland, and Kasich, all those administrators, both Republicans and Democrats in there. You worked with and interacted with what would have been Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama. So you worked there too, and you definitely see this administration as different than other administrations you've had the privilege and opportunity to work and serve.
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Chairman.
I want to thank all of you for being here today and your important testimony. We appreciate what you do in your communities and the service you provide the taxpayers of this great state. And we'll go now to our second panel. If the folks can get ready for that, we're ready to go. Second panel of witnesses, Mr. Sean Garvin, is the Administrator of Region 3 of the Environmental Protection Agency, and Mr. Bharat Mathur. Smile when I said it, so I must have been pretty close. Is the Deputy Administrator of Region 5 of the United States Environmental Protection Agency. We want to thank both of you for being here. You guys know how this works. You have to stand up and go on in. You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Let the record show that both witnesses answered the affirmative. And again, you guys have done this before, but you get 5 minutes. And I think if I understood from our staff, just Mr. Garvin is going to make his opening statement, and then we'll get right to questions.
Yes.
Mr. Garvin, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Jordan and members of the subcommittee. I am Sean Garvin, Regional Administrator of the United States Environmental Protection Agency's Mid-Atlantic Region, Region 3. I'm here to testify on behalf of EPA's Great Lakes and Mid-Atlantic regions, and I'm joined by my colleague, Deputy Regional Administrator Bharat Mathur of EPA's Great Lakes region, which includes Ohio. As the agency has indicated to your staff, we are responsible for the implementation of regulations designed and promulgated in EPA's headquarters office in Washington, D.C., in both the Mid-Atlantic and Great Lakes regions, respectively. As the agency has also indicated to your staff, while questions that relate to specific national efforts fall outside of our responsibility, we are more than happy to refer those questions to the appropriate EPA staff. Let me begin by being clear. EPA does not have a, quote, war on coal. The actions of the agency are based on sound science and the law. I will focus my testimony on EPA's work with clean water. Mr. Chairman, as you know, our community's businesses depend on our nation's waters for drinking, swimming, fishing, farming, manufacturing, energy development, tourism, and other activities essential to the American economy and quality of life. Without protections at the state and federal level, many of these activities would be threatened by polluted water. Congress recognized this in a bipartisan fashion when it passed the Clean Air Act in 1972, which was signed by President Nixon. While the agency works very closely and collaboratively with state partners, the Clean Water Act requires that EPA oversees these authorized state programs to ensure the goals and requirements of the Act are being met. Relating to the permitting of certain types of coal mining projects, the Clean Water Act designated the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as the permitting agency for discharges of dredge or fill material. EPA may provide comments and information to the Corps on specific permit applications and may request that the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works review certain permit decisions.
Also, the act authorizes EPA to prohibit, deny, restrict, or withdraw specifications of fill disposal sites, an authority the EPA has exercised only 13 times since 1972. Our regional office worked constructively with the Corps, states, and other partners to provide input that may assist applicants in developing environmentally sound projects in cases where a discharge of dredge or fill material into nation's waters is being proposed. I know the committee has a special interest in the Appalachia surface coal mining. Our work here is informed by peer-reviewed science documenting the environmental and public health impacts of certain unsustainable mining practices of the past. Recent studies point to environmental impacts and challenges from surface coal mining that were largely unrecognized even 10 years ago. Between 1992 and 2002, more than 1,200 miles of Appalachia headwater streams have been impacted by Appalachian surface coal mining practices. EPA has documented ecologically detrimental changes to Appalachian ecosystems associated with impacts from surface coal mining. Today, EPA works closely with partners in the federal government, the states, and industry to ensure that projects can move forward when designed to minimize environmental impacts. Let me be clear, EPA has not established a moratorium on coal mining. EPA is not blocking or delaying National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permits from being issued. In fact, EPA has issued very few objections that would prevent NPDES permits for mining discharges from being issued. Of the 283 draft NPDES permits for mining discharges received by EPA from West Virginia, for example, between July 21st, 2011 and June 25th, 2012, EPA issued a specific objection to the draft permits less than 2% of the time. In those cases, EPA is continuing work with the state and other applicants to resolve issues that are the basis for EPA's objections. In June 2012, the average time for EPA review for NPDES permits for mining discharges in West Virginia was 11 days. The state of Ohio has chosen to cover surface coal mines under general permits where appropriate. We are committed to working together with our states and federal partners, coal companies, and the public to ensure that decisions under the Clean Water Act are consistent with the law and best available science. Families should not have to choose between healthy waters and a healthy economy. They deserve and can have both. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Barat and I would be pleased to answer any questions you may have. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Garvin. Mr. Garvin, you said in your testimony, I heard it correctly, that the EPA does not have a war on coal. Is that you stick by that?
Yes.
What about this administration? Do you think this administration is waging a war on coal?
No.
Do you think there is a bias towards other forms of energy and a bias against coal?
No.
Were you sitting here in the audience for the first panel, Mr. Garvin?
I was.
And you heard all four of those witnesses, what they had to say?
Yes.
Specifically, Mr. Houghton-Boese, you heard what he had to say in his 40 years of experience in working for the Ohio EPA?
Yes.
How many years have you worked with the EPA?
Since 1997.
97, so what's that, 15?
15 years. A little over 15.
15 years. So he's got 25 more years working. You're saying that his description of this administration is not accurate?
I'm saying that I'm not qualifying what he said. I'm telling you from.
You don't think it's biased when an administration takes $16 billion of taxpayer money and gives it to 26 companies, 22 of which had a double B minus rating from Fitch on their credit rating, and three of those 22 companies went bankrupt? You don't think that's a bias towards alternative forms of energy?
That's outside my role and responsibility.
No, but your statement was, you just answered my question a little bit ago. I said, do you think there is a bias towards other forms of energy and a bias against coal? You said no. Now I'm asking you don't think there's a bias when they give 26 companies get tax dollars, 22 of them had a double B minus rating, and 3 of them have already went bankrupt?
I can only respond based on what we're doing in EPA Region 3.
Well, let me ask you, you mentioned Region 3, I know there are 10 regions. Let me play for you some of the statements made by people in other regions who have the same job that you have, but or oversee different parts of the country.
I was in a meeting once and I gave an analogy to my staff about my philosophy of enforcement, and I think it was probably a little crude and maybe not appropriate for the meeting, but I'll go ahead and tell you what I said. It was kind of like how the Romans used to conquer little villages in the Mediterranean. They'd go to a little Turkish town somewhere, they'd find the first 5 guys they saw, they crucify them. Then, that town was really easy to manage for the next few years. And so,
in Washington, EPA faces a very tough political climate. But President Obama and Administrator Jackson are standing firm in our fight to protect the environment and the health of Americans with environmental safeguards like these. But they can't do it alone. That's why gatherings like this and your active involvement on these issues is so very, very important. Thank you, and thank you again for bringing me all of these comments personally. It means a great deal.
But know right now, we are struggling. We're struggling because we're trying to do our jobs. And Lisa Jackson has put forth a very powerful message to the country. Just 2 days ago, the decision on greenhouse gas performance standard, and saying basically gas plants are the performance standard, which means if you want to build a coal plant, you got a big problem. That was a huge decision. You can't imagine how tough that was. Because you got to remember, if you go to West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and all those places, you have coal communities who depend on coal. And to say we just think those communities should just go away, we can't do that. But she had to do what the law and policy suggested. And it's painful. It's painful every step of the way.
Okay, Mr. Garvin, let me take them in order. The first one, Mr. Armendariz, do you agree with the statement where he talked about people who aren't doing what they want, that you use the term, I didn't like to say the term, but do you agree with the way he described how he was going to treat people in this particular industry?
I can only focus on what I do in Region 3 and how we approach it.
But he has the same responsibilities in his region that you have in yours. All I'm asking is, do you think he was appropriate, his comments and how he described, or do you think his comments were appropriate?
I can only respond to what
okay.
we're focused on.
What about the second one? Well, let me say this. Now let's go this way. Ms. Hedman, do you think it's appropriate that someone in your position, I'll say it this way, we saw in the film Ms. Hedman accepting petitions from people supporting a rule that the first panel testified about how difficult that makes them to do their business and create jobs. Do you think it's appropriate for an administrator to accept petitions from a group supporting a rule and show that acceptance by her conduct? Do you think that's appropriate?
The agency receives comments from all sectors on all rules, and we treat them all the same.
Do you typically show up at a press conference at a rally and applaud those people for giving you those petitions?
I can only talk about what I do in Region 3.
Have you ever shown up at a pep rally and applauded the people who bring you petitions, environmental groups who bring you petitions? You have not?
I have not.
Never?
Never.
Okay. What about the third clip where Mr. Spalding, speaking at Yale University, said, Lisa Jackson has put forth a very powerful message to the country. If you want to build a coal plant, you've got a big problem.
I can't comment on that. I can only focus on what we do in Region 3, and we focus on
Lisa Jackson, did she not tell the truth there?
I believe that the administrator can speak for herself.
Do you think the statement she made, if you want to build a coal plant, you got a big problem, think that's accurate?
I'm not familiar with that statement, so I can't respond to it.
Well, I'm reading it to you. Lisa Jackson has put forth a very powerful message. This is Kurt Spalding, has the same job in Region 1 that you have in your region. He says, she has stated it plainly, if you want to build a coal plant, you got a big problem.
I don't know what statement he's referring to, so I can't comment on it.
She has to do what the law and policy suggests, and it's painful. It's painful every step of the way. You agree with that statement or not?
That is Mr. Spalding making a statement about what the administrator may or may not said. I'm not familiar with what the administrator said, so I can't comment on that.
Mr. Mathur, is there a reason why Ms. Hedman was not able to join us today? Do you know why she's your boss, is that right?
That's right, Congressman.
And why wasn't she able to join us?
She had a long-standing engagement with senior members of 15 federal agencies that she found it very difficult to cancel.
And that's more important than coming to an area of the country where jobs have been lost because of policies from this administration and speaking to a congressional hearing?
It is not more important. It had to
Well, no. By definition, she said she had a long-standing meeting and she went there and didn't come here. So obviously to her, it's more important that she's there than to be in Southeast Ohio talking about how jobs are impacted by this administration in both Ohio or in
3 states, Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia. She felt that was more important than coming here and having to answer why she was at a rally accepting petitions from people who want to make it difficult for jobs to continue to be available in these 3 states.
She was meeting, Mr. Chairman, with 15 senior officials of 15 federal agencies.
Yeah.
About the
Well, I got that the first time.
And she was not able to cancel.
I got
she
that.
regrets
15 people in this administration are more important than 4 members of Congress and the thousands of jobs that are at stake in Southeast Ohio and Pennsylvania, West Virginia. We got that.
I can't speak for her beyond what I just said.
Do you think it was appropriate for her to stand at a rally and accept petitions and thank the people for giving those petitions that are going to impact the very jobs that we're talking about here today?
I know that when she was first invited to meet with that group, she declined. And it was only when they assembled outside our building in fairly significant numbers and were actually noisy in demonstrations that she decided to go down. And I think she would have met with anyone who would have asked to meet with her under those circumstances.
Well, she wouldn't meet with us. She might meet with anyone, but she won't meet with us because we asked her. We asked her to come today, and she says, no, I'd rather hang out with 15 people in the administration than talk to 4 members of Congress in Southeast Ohio where jobs are being lost, plants are being closed, and communities are being devastated because of the policies of this administration. And that's not just Jim Jordan talking. That's not the other 3 members of Congress talking. That's the first panel talking that you just heard.
I'm hopeful.
That's someone with 40 years experience in the EPA who was hired by a Democrat administration saying the same thing.
I'm hopeful, Mr. Chairman, that I can respond to questions regarding Region 5 procedures to your satisfaction.
Well, we appreciate you being here. We do appreciate that someone from Region 5 was able to come here even though the administrator was not able to. And I see him over time. Would yield now to the gentleman from Southeast Ohio, Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Chairman, thanks. I appreciate you gentlemen being here. I'm actually sitting here kind of chuckling because Mr. Garvin, your arrogance and your tone of adversarialism in responding to the questions that have been proposed to you already, you're making the case that we're here trying to make to the American people and the people of Eastern and Southeastern Ohio and West Virginia and other places across this country that are dependent upon coal. Your bury your head in the sand responses that it's not my responsibility, it's not within my scope. Let me ask you a question. I sat with one of your superiors not too long ago, and I asked them the question about the impacts of the regulations coming out of your department, out of the EPA, and its effect on industries that are critical to national security. That individual said to me, Mr. Johnson, it's not my job to be concerned about national security. It's my job to protect the air. Do you subscribe to that same philosophy, Mr. Garvin? That you have no responsibility in your actions to secure this, the national security of the United States?
I think we all have a specific role to play.
I asked you a very specific question. I don't want innuendo. I said, do you subscribe to the philosophy that director said that it's the EPA's responsibility not to be concerned about national security, but to be concerned about the air?
I have a certain role in the administration and
Are you concerned about national security?
I think everybody's concerned about
No,
it.
I ask you, are you concerned in your role and responsibility about national security? That's a yes or no question, Mr.
My
Garvin.
role is to discharge the
No, what you're telling me is no.
Statutes.
What you are telling me is no. Again, your arrogance and your tone of adversarialism and your waffling on the questions is proving exactly to the American people what we're trying to demonstrate here today. That not only does this administration have a war on coal, but you have a war on the very idea of American exceptionalism. And you have no concern whatsoever for national security and other implications of your actions. You should be ashamed, Mr. Garvin. You and everyone else in the EPA that subscribes to that philosophy. So, what is your background? What did you do before you came to the EPA?
I worked in local government.
You worked in local government. In your testimony, you talked about how EPA's decisions is based on valid science. How much education and experience do you have in science? You ever been a scientist?
I am not.
You ever worked in an industry where science was a requirement of your job?
I have not.
You ever worked as a chemist or a biologist or any of that?
I have not.
Then you don't know personally, do you, whether or not EPA's policies are based on sound science?
I do.
How do you know that?
Because
What are your qualifications to tell us that? Give us your expert opinion.
I've been doing this for 15 years.
No, but you have no background in science, Mr. Garvin. Tell us how you know that the EPA's policies are based on sound science.
Because I know the science and I have
No, you don't.
very good...
You just testified that you don't know the science, Mr. Garvin, because you've never worked in a scientific field. How do you know that it's based on sound science?
I've been doing this in this field.
You can testify to this subcommittee. You can testify to this subcommittee what you hear from the EPA officials above you in terms of sound bites and talking points to advocate sound science when we can prove through industry proof that it's not sound science, that it requires compliance technologies that aren't even available. You can testify to that, but yet you can't answer simple questions that are directed to you by the chairman of this subcommittee and the representatives here about what your roles and responsibilities are in terms of overall. Let me submit something to you. You work for the EPA. The EPA is part of the executive branch of the United States, and the first and foremost responsibility of the executive branch is to ensure the national security of this nation. We do that through ensuring that we have a vibrant economy and that we have manufacturing and that we have energy in order to protect ourselves. For you and your administration and for you and your leadership to say that you're not responsible for national security, and I want to make sure I go on record because you just told me that's what you said.
That's not what I said.
That's exactly what you said, Mr. Garvin. You said, I do not, my roles and responsibilities are such and such. You never answered my question directly about whether or not you were concerned about national security. Mr. Chairman, I don't know what we do about compelling these witnesses to answer our questions, but I'm pretty frustrated. I'll yield back.
Let me just pick up there real quick if I could. Mr. Garvin, what was your undergraduate degree in?
Political science.
Political science. Do you have a graduate degree?
I do not.
Okay. And have you ever worked for anyone in politics?
Yes.
And who did you work for?
I worked for United States Senator Joseph Biden and County Executive Dennis E. Greenhouse.
Is that the same Joe Biden who's now Vice President of the United States?
Yes.
Okay. So let me just and you still stick by the statement that there's no bias in this administration towards green energy and against coal.
That's
what he said when I asked.
Yeah, we don't have a bias against coal.
Okay.
That is correct.
All right, but so now you're changing. You do have a bias pro green energy, pro wind and solar?
Our responsibility is to focus on the environment, so depending on how you characterize green agenda will depend on how I answer the question.
So I just want to make the contrast that I think Mr. Johnson was making. So you got undergraduate degree in political science, you've worked for Joe Biden, and you've so no background in science, other than political science. And then in our first panel, we had Mr. Hodenbosi, who has a undergraduate degree in chemical engineering. He's got a master's degree in chemical engineering. He's a professional engineer in the state of Ohio. He's part of the American Institute for Chemical Engineers Air Waste Management Association and has worked almost 40 years for both Democrat and Republican administrations. And his testimony was that there is certainly a bias in this administration towards coal. Any response?
He's entitled to his opinion. I stand by mine.
All right, I would just say the facts are the facts and the background is the background. With that, I would yield to Mr. Kelly.
And if we could, I want to just look at the footage again because, Mr. Mothler, you're here because Ms. Hedman can't be here, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. If we could just go back to Ms. Hedman.
Thank you again. Jackson, our state.
Really? So.
If we could just hold Ms. Hedman.
In Washington.
There's a difference. She could have been here. She chose not to come. It wasn't like she had a family emergency or anything like that. She chose to go to another meeting. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, my understanding is that she did not get out of the other meeting on the Great Lakes, regarding the Great Lakes.
Okay.
Faces a very tough political climate. But President Obama Administrator Jackson are standing firm in our fight to protect the environment and the health of Americans with environmental safeguards like these. But they can't do it alone. That's why gatherings like this and your active involvement on these issues is so very, very important. Thank you, and thank you again for bringing me all of these comments personally. It means a great deal.
Were you also there that day?
Beg your pardon?
Were you there that day whenever Ms. Edelman?
I was not at the event.
But it was a group that showed up outside the office,
That's correct.
and you said that she felt almost compelled because there were so many of them out there that she felt she would have to address them.
That's correct.
So if we took our miners, they're losing their jobs every day because of this war on coal, and if there is a war on coal. I wish we'd stop tap dancing, call it what it is, but waddles like a duck and quacks like a duck. It's a duck. This is a duck, okay? If Miss Heaven, now she was so compelled to go out and meet with these folks and holds up all these petitions, I'm sure she went through each one to make sure they're valid. So I'm just wondering, you think that Miss Heaven would feel compelled, but our miners who are losing their jobs and our people that own these mines are closing down their mines and our electric power generation plants are closing down, if those folks showed up, do you think she can be compelled to go out there and thank them for showing up?
I can't speak.
I know you can't speak for them. Neither one of you can speak for anybody. You sure as hell can't speak for the American people. And you can't speak for these miners. You can't speak for these people that own these coal mines. I want to tell you what a tough job is. A tough job is not a tough political environment. It's an environment that makes it so impossible for our job creators to even exist anymore. That's a tough environment. Don't give me this hogwash about, oh, it's so tough being in one of these agencies and enforcing all this stuff. I don't buy that for 1 second. Now, Miss Edmond couldn't be here. And I love Kurt Spaulding talking. And you know what? I got to ask you, Mr. Garvin, I know you don't like this. But you want to build a coal plant, you got a big problem. Moreover, he stated that the decision was painful. Because you got to remember, if you go to West Virginia, Pennsylvania, it didn't include Ohio, but Ohio's the same way. In all these places, you have coal communities dependent on coal. And to say we just think those communities should just go away, we can't do that. But you had to do what the law and the policy suggested. You know the key to that is the policy suggested. I got to tell you, we sit in these meetings. I wish you all would walk the same places we walk in our districts and look these folks in the eyes and you tell them you're doing it in their best interest. And you tell them that it's okay to shut down these plants. And it's okay to shut down their mines. It's okay to shut down their communities. And tell them, you know, the biggest problem we can have in this country is some people just don't pay their fair share. I'll tell you what they're not sharing is the pain. You want to talk about pain? You lose your job. You lose your ability to feed your family. You lose your ability to stay in the hometown that you grew up in the state that you grew up in because of a government that's decided you're no longer viable. And for anybody to walk around this district or any other district and say there's no loss of jobs, they're either outright liars or they're in severe denial and they need to see somebody else that has a degree in some other field. But I got to tell you, I've sat in front of these too many times. And I understand you don't want to talk about what somebody else said. I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. You know, we're all Americans. And you can tell me that you can sit there as an American and say that you think this is all right because you're enforcing a policy. I'd quit that job as fast as I could. I'd have run away from anybody that was taking the livelihood away from Americans. I know you can't. I'm not even asking you a question because you know what? None are going to answer. You're not going to answer. You're just not. But we got it on tape. We know what they say. And we know what other people are saying around this community about there's no loss of jobs. Really? Really? Go to those homes where the dad's not working. Go to those homes where the mom can't make the budget anymore because the dad doesn't have his job. I want you to look them in the eye and sit before them. I represent 705,687 people in Western Pennsylvania. I don't know if they're Republican, Democrat, Independent, Libertarian. I don't know what they are. You know what they do? No. They're all Americans. For this administration to pick out fossil fuels and specifically coal and have a war on coal, your boss, Mr. Garvin, is very biased towards coal. You can't deny that. Now, the fact that you worked with him or worked for him many years, if you don't think he was biased, then I don't see how you can sit there and say, I don't think he has a bias. I do think he has a bias. And I think his boss has a bias. And I think this whole administration has a bias. And that's why we're here today. And I think America needs to understand where the bias is. So I'll tell you what, Mr. Chairman, as people say, Kelly, sometimes you seem like you're mad. I am mad. I am mad. But I'm not going to sit here and watch this great country go down the drain because of upside down thinking people and people that go out there and distort and purposely lie to the public and try to hide what's going on because their party asks too much of them. President Kennedy said at one time, sometimes your party asks too much. It's not about our party, it's about our people. These folks right here. If you think you represent anything other than the American people, you got raised by the wrong folks. Now you go back.
Thank the gentleman. Appreciate his passion. Go down to the gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. McKinley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I'm detecting here, a little frustration both ways on this. I'm hearing a lot of denial, and as it relates to employment. I saw in the Post-Gazette the other day, there was an article up there about President is probably the most pro-coal president we've had in years. I can't comprehend that, but I fell back on where they were saying there is no layoff. There have been no layoffs in coal, and I grasp it. What world are people living in? When I just sitting here based on some of the remarks you made, I thought layoffs with Consol, Arch Coal, Patriot, PBS Coal, Rocks Coal, Murray Coal, Murray Energy. So they're all across America. There are coal companies that are laying off people here in Belmont County and in West Virginia. And I heard you say something about science, and it caught my attention, Mr. Garvin, because I am interested in science as an engineer and trained in science. That we've looked at in Washington about the T-clip ratings, toxicity characteristic, leaching profile, and we've listened to the pushback of the administration saying time and time again, Lisa Jackson saying how coal is toxic. Well, if you look at it, and she uses it, she says it's toxic because of the mercury content. But the mercury content in coal is 0.17 parts per million. There is more mercury in a can of tuna fish at 0.39 parts per million. Would you suggest that tuna fish is toxic? Should there be an ad run about toxic for tuna fish?
There has been a recognition when looking at impacts of water that consumption of tuna should
That's
be
my question. Would you ban the use of, if she's trying to make fly ash and coal a hazardous material, is the administration talking about doing that with tuna fish?
We're trying to find ways to deal with what is causing the mercury in tuna fish as well as in humans and other things as addressing sources.
It's just one, but again, the question, it's been around, we've known about it. I've known that the mercury level in tuna fish and other marine products is high, but we don't see the attack on that. We see something going after the jobs, something that is creating jobs for Americans, just what some of the congressmen have said here. Let me go back to just two quick points. One, in a hearing we had before Energy and Commerce Committee, it was interesting that Representative of the EPA was saying we need more research into clean coal technology. I thought that was a great position. That's what we've been saying all along. Let's keep doing that. But yet the President and Secretary Chu did my opening remarks. Perhaps you heard that. They cut the funding for clean coal technology, both 41% this time and 39% last year. Do you think that people are talking to each other in Washington? Is the EPA talking with Chu in the Department of Energy?
I know there's coordination between our agencies, yes.
I mean, you go back to that earlier remark when we're adults here. You know, this idea of going into denial is just, it's really a waste of time. We've got Secretary Chu's own remarks. He said, Mr. Garvin, time and time again, that coal is his worst nightmare. And when he testified before the committee, I remember turning to him and I'll say the same thing to you, that with all due respect, I think the EPA and the DOE are the worst nightmare for the working men and women of America in the coal fields all across America. It's not the reverse. It's not coal. It's the actions, their over-regulation with it. So let me conclude with one thing. I'm just curious where the EPA may be going. Maybe you can give me some insight into it. When in the EPA's own website says that indoor air quality can be as much as 96 times more hazardous to people's health. Why aren't we paying more attention to some of those issues instead of going after the industry, the people that are employing men and women all across America on the outsource? We think that 90% of our time we spend indoors. But yet the EPA and some of the individuals will come to us in Congress and our committee and say that the outdoor air is causing asthma, is causing deformities in our childbirths, it's causing premature deaths, it's causing lack of school days. How can you differentiate that when 90% of your time is spent indoors where you're not exposed to the greenhouse gas exposure that perhaps you have on the outside? How do you differentiate that? When someone says, I've got an answer to that, well, it was caused because of a coal-fired powerhouse, not because I was breathing dust mites or aerosols or formaldehyde and emissions inside my house. How do you differentiate that from the EPA's position?
Well, we're focusing on both indoor and outdoor air. But what we do know that the chemicals that cause certain issues as well as environmental issues inside the home, and we're trying to focus on addressing all of those issues. You talked about kind of focusing on jobs and focusing on coal, and what we've been focusing on Region 3 is working with our states and working with industry, and so at least from the coal mining side of it, that we can still find a way to extract the valuable energy resource, but doing it in a way that protects public health and the environment. And that's what
I just think you're picking on an old dog, something that's generated jobs. It was the backbone of this America. It's one that fueled our economy. The Industrial Revolution is coal, and I think you're picking on it. Instead of having that science that you claim the EPA uses, I wish it would use it to fight the right area where people truly do have issues. It's not the outdoor air quality. It's that exposure on indoor air quality. We ought to be taking a much harder look at that than we are about shutting down our powerhouses and threatening our manufacturers. So with that, I yield back my time.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Garvin, I want to go back to where Mr. Kelly was, and Mr. Spalding's statement. Again, Mr. Spalding's a colleague of yours, representing the region, what, just to the north of you? He's New England?
He's New England.
He's New England?
He's 2 up from us.
And your area again is, give me the states in your district.
Delaware, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Maryland, and the District of Columbia.
Okay. So Mr. Spalding, speaking at Yale University, this is a quote. Lisa Jackson has put forth a very powerful message to the country. If you want to build a coal plant, you got a big problem. Well restated in the decision, and to say that you got to remember, if you go to West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and all those places, you have coal communities who depend on coal. And to say that we just think these communities should go away, we can't do that. But she had to do what the law and the policy suggested, and it's painful. It's painful every step of the way. So let me again just ask you, do you think it's painful? I'm not asking whether you agree with Mr. Spalding necessarily, but do you think it's painful to implement the law and policy as they're suggested by this administration?
Our focus in Region 3 has been focusing on the law and science, and as we focused on, and mainly talking about the clean water, because that's really the issues of implementation, that we have been focusing on ways in which the industry can continue to extract the resource, but do it in a way that's protective of human health and the environment. And that is what we've done in West Virginia, that's what we've done in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I understand that. But yes or no, is it tough? Is it painful? Is it difficult? Is it difficult?
I mean, I don't know how to qualify that. I mean, we focus on the impacts of decisions we make, and we make our decisions based on sound science and basis of law.
So
It's protecting focusing on both what the industry is trying to do and protecting the public health of the citizens that live in that area.
So is your answer, you don't think it's difficult for these policies to be implemented, the impact it has? You don't think it's difficult for?
I'm not sure how to qualify that
Mr. Mack?
question.
Mr. Maple, excuse me? You don't think it's difficult?
I'm not sure of the question. We do our job, and we do it to the best of our ability, and we focus on all the various impacts.
No, I know, I understand that, but what I'm asking is it difficult when you do your job on the policy that's there? Do you think it's difficult for the folks in the field, the folks who are on the first panel, do you think it's difficult for them to implement your policy? I mean, your colleague, Mr. Spalding, does.
I think we're all generally want to have the same outcome, which is.
Do you know Mr. Spalding?
I do.
All right. What's his background? Has he got a political science degree, or does he actually have a degree in some kind of science related field?
I don't know. I can't answer that. I don't.
But you know.
I do know.
Think he's a sharp guy?
Yeah.
All right. So you disagree? You don't think it's painful? You don't think what he said here is accurate?
I can't really respond to what he said.
I don't know why it's so difficult to respond. He's saying it's tough. You were here for the first panel. You heard how tough they're saying it is, the people they've had to lay off, the difficulties they've had to deal with. You heard from a state representative who represents people in this area. It's not difficult?
I'm not sure I understand the question, sir.
I don't know what. Okay. Okay. I'm just flabbergasted. Is it you don't understand, or you won't answer?
I don't.
Can you give me a yes or no? Do you think it's difficult to implement the policies that come from this administration? And you heard in the first panel from someone who has 40 years experience at the Ohio EPA who says this administration is making it more difficult than any he's ever dealt with, and he's dealt with several since 1973. But you don't think it's more difficult?
I think we're implementing the statutes that were passed by Congress, the regulations that have been promulgated, and basing it on sound science.
Okay.
So,
And do you think that's harder for the people who have to live under those regulations? Do you think it's more difficult? I mean, part of this is real simple.
more difficult than what? I'm
More
trying to
difficult
figure.
than previously.
I think we're basically dealing with the same laws and same regulations that we've dealt with.
Now you
previously.
said it. Now you said it. So this is the point. Clean Water Act's been around for a while. But suddenly, according to Mr. Hodenbosi and according to the witness on the first panel, they say now it's more difficult for them to deal with it. Mr. Hodenbosi said this administration is taking this to a level we've never seen before. That's the question.
I can't answer what he thinks is more difficult or not difficult. We are implementing the statutes that were passed by Congress.
So are they just out to lunch? They don't get it? If you're just implementing the law and the policy, and if that is the same as it's always been, then why were these four people? Do you think they were lying when they testified in the first panel?
I can't speak for them, Congressman.
Well, but that's what you're saying.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we're implementing the laws and regulations.
And they're saying that the laws and regulations that you're implementing are much more difficult than they've been under any previous administration. And that's the fundamental question I'm asking. Do you think that's accurate?
Again, I can't
It's
speak.
part of your job to listen to you represent, your region includes West Virginia and Pennsylvania, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, and some of the folks here have people who work in those states. Do you think part of your job is to listen to what they have to say, take that back?
Absolutely.
And take that into account?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
And I've done it. And
Well,
that's
we
what-
hope you did that. We really did. I'll yield now to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Garvin, when did you work for now Vice President Biden? What years?
From 1989 to 1999.
Okay. I'd like to ask you a question, probably a little bit easier for you because it's based on your extensive scientific background that we've talked about here. In 2007, Vice President Biden said that coal is more dangerous than high fructose corn syrup. Based on your scientific assessment of that, is that true?
I can't respond to that.
It's science, Mr. Garvin.
I can't respond to that.
You won't respond to that.
I can't.
Yeah, I got it. You said just a few minutes ago to the chairman that in your region that you're implementing the statutes that have been passed by Congress. But that's not what one of your colleagues in Region 1 says. He says that you're making policies based on what the law suggests, not what the law says. Is that what you do in your region? Do you base your decisions in your region based on the words of the statute or what the statutes in your interpretation suggests?
We do it based on the statute and regulations.
Okay, so you disagree then with what the gentleman from Region 1 said, right?
I can only speak to what we're doing in Region 3.
I got that too. Mr. Garvin, do you have any responsibility, sense of responsibility to the job creators and the businesses and the consumers in the district that you represent or the region that you represent? Do you have a sense of responsibility to them?
We take that all into consideration when we implement the statutes and the regulations, is finding ways to work with the states and with the industries to protect human health and the environment and continue to have a healthy
That's right out of your mission statement, right? You got that down pretty good. Who do you work for, Mr. Garvin?
I work for Lisa Jackson.
You work for Lisa Jackson?
U.S. Environmental Protection
Okay.
Agency.
Has that ever occurred to you that you work for the American people?
I do.
You do? But yet you can't tell me that you've got a responsibility to the job creators that are in your region. How can you say that you work for the American people when all you know how to do, based on your extensive scientific background and experience, is to read talking points that someone has given to you? How can you say that you stand up and man up to that responsibility?
We focus on our responsibility of protecting human health and the environment as well as the economic impacts.
Oh, you do consider the economic impacts?
Yes.
You do?
The
All right.
agency,
Well, what do you say then to policies that threaten thousands of coal-related jobs, and to the what do you say to the families that are associated with those kinds of policies?
What I can say is focusing on Region 3 when we focus on the Clean Water Act and we focus on the 402 permits, the MPDS permits, and the 404 permits, which are the fill permits. We look to find the ways to avoid, to mitigate, and to minimize, and mitigate, to allow a project to move forward so it's still protecting the human health and environment of the people.
Memory's a tricky thing, isn't it? When you can't remember those talking points, it gets tough trying to evade these questions. Mr. Chairman, this is going nowhere. I yield back.
Recognize the gentleman from West Virginia.
Chairman, thank you. Let's go back to the science again, that issue. The standards set forth by the EPA using TCLIP been very clear about what levels of toxicity and barium, arsenic, mercury, selenium, lead, other heavy metals that they're very clear as to what. But coal doesn't achieve any of those. It's always below in all tests, in virtually every coal, whether it's from the Powder Ridge Basin out west or the Northern Appalachian coal. They all test below those and all that. But yet the EPA continues to refer to coal as being toxic. But it doesn't meet the standards of toxicity. It's below the standard. Do you think coal is toxic?
I believe that burning of coal has an environmental impact that we're looking to
Is it toxic? Does it exceed your own standards? Does it exceed the standard that you set up, the EPA set up for toxicity? Does it exceed it?
I'll have to refer that back to our scientific experts. And I can give you an answer to that question.
I'm sorry. It just causes uncertainty. You can see that's what we're just saying there. You know it doesn't reach those toxicity levels, but yet it's commonly referred to as a toxic material. I've already just demonstrated to you that the mercury level in a can of tuna fish, there is more mercury in a can of tuna fish than there is in an equivalent can of fly ash. But yet over here we're trying to cause it as a hazardous material, and this we serve it to our children to eat. The uncertainty that the EPA is, if you remember the statement I made earlier, I think perhaps you did, and that was just because you can doesn't mean you should. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And the EPA has a tendency of continuing to swirl the uncertainty because it can. It can create any standard that it wants. They don't answer to us in Congress. They only answer to the president. You know that. We can't correct it. We can offer alternatives. We can offer a legislation, but we can't get them to repeal an EPA standard. So I'm wondering about. I don't know where you're going with the EPA. With the soot standard, the soot rule, we want to go from 15 milligrams per cubic meter down to 12. We're going to spend billions of dollars to reduce the amount of particular matter in the air. Well, why stop at 12? Why not 10? Why not 5? Because as soon as industry, those powerhouses or anyone, the manufacturing plants, once they achieve the 12, then you said, I'm going to issue another standard. And then they have to go change their technology, different bag houses, different electrostatic precipitator, different devices to do it. It's uncertainty that you keep creating at the federal level. Just because you can, not because you should. They've testified before us in Energy and Commerce. They can't justify on a health standard to make a reduction in particular matter from 15 to 12. But you're allowed to do it because the president has authorized the EPA to promulgate these rules, but there's no basis of it. Where are you going with this? Is there a reason that we just do it incrementally? Why not tell industry that 20 years from now you're going to get down to 5 micrograms per cubic meter, and they can plan for that instead of incrementally keep changing the rules as we go along? What is the thought process there with the EPA?
As I told you in my opening statement, our job in the regions is implementation. We don't create or promulgate the rules. That is done by the policymakers in DC, and so I can't really respond to that.
I guess we'll have to deal with another day when you come to Washington. We can carry on this conversation because you can see how frustrating it is. We know the EPA is promulgating the rules. If we want to parse our words and say it's the regulators are doing it, it's what the EPA is doing. So, yes.
But just in previous question, I asked you, part of your job is to listen to what constituents in your district have to say, like people who are on the first panel. So which is it? You're going to listen to them and take that information back, but you can only do what they say. Are you going to actually take that information back and try to impact those regulations? Because you've heard from people who you represent, or at least you're supposed to represent, you heard from on the first panel.
No, absolutely. As I said, we will take that information back and we will provide that to those who make the decisions. My point to the congressman from West Virginia was I can't respond to how the ultimate decision is going to be made, but we can help provide information on what we're seeing in our regions from various areas and sectors on issues and concerns that are related to this.
Before the decisions were made on Utility Act and other rules that have been promulgated by this administration, did you seek input from people in West Virginia, Pennsylvania? Did you pass it up the line to those folks?
We had our staff that was passing along information based on what our engagement with.
Did you pass it along to them?
Not personally, no.
Okay. Mr. Kelly?
Mr. Gardner.
Yes.
In your discussion, I think, with Congressman McKinnon, you said that not only environmental impact, but you also look at the economic impact. So,
yes.
Okay. So what are the metrics? Tell me, when you look at the economic impact, where's the cutoff point? Where do you say we're trying to achieve something that doesn't make sense economically?
There's not a matrix. What I'm referring to is we have an applicant that comes before us with a permit, be it either a 402, which is direct delegated authority from EPA to the states, or a core permit in which EPA is engaged in the process, and we look at the project that they're looking to implement, and we try to find ways to work with both the state, the Corps, and the applicant to figure out how best to protect the environment as well as continue to move forward with their project. Okay. I give an example, the Hobart mine that was permanent. We were all able to successfully work together to reduce 50% of the impacts getting over 91 or 92% of the coal take that the company was looking for.
Yeah,
So when I talk about economics, that's kind of
okay. Well, in time in business, time is always of the essence. Permitting times. I have friends that do this, and they tell me it's gotten to the point right now. Now, it may be that there's just not enough people to review the permits. I don't know. But this idea that it can take whatever amount of time it takes to get something reviewed. I mean, you could stall anybody for about as long as you want. In the coal business, these people have done this for some generations, are experiencing a tie-up in getting permits. Now, you said there is no permit moratorium, and I would tell you that may be okay for you to say, but when you're actually on the field, there's a tremendous tie-up. These folks cannot keep their machinery idle and their working crews idle while the department, whether it be you or the Army Corps of Engineers, continues to sift through this permitting. You don't think it's taking longer to get permits?
Well, in Pennsylvania.
Just yes or no, I mean, because I don't want to put you through this too much longer.
No, in Pennsylvania we have, basically there are no core permits, no 404, there's no mountaintop mining, it's all subsurface and all long
So these people that are telling me that it's taking much longer to get a permit, is that a...
I can't speak for the process for the state to get it to us, but we have a 30-day clock to do a general objection and then a 90-day clock to address that. We've had 113 permits in 2000, from the same period of 2011 to 12 in Pennsylvania. We had one objection, which has since been resolved. So I'm not sure what that's based on.
Okay, well, I'll tell you, for me, what it's based on is going out and actually talking to people in the business and saying to them, so how much tougher is it for you now than it was before? And they're telling me it's much more difficult. Now, they have no reason to tell me that, other than the fact that they're trying to make payrolls, they're trying to be profitable, and they're just trying to keep their business alive. So there's nothing in it for them to tell me that. What they keep saying to me is what can you guys do to help us? So I really do wonder about, but the return on this, I still, if we're not studying the economic impact of some of this policy making that we're doing, how do we know it's beneficial? I mean, is there no determination of where are we trying to get to? And at what point do we say it's no longer economically feasible to do it? And I think that's what we're doing with a lot of these folks. We're putting them out of business. I mean, they can't continue to do what we're asking them to do because we're raising the bar all the time for them. I wish that DOE had used that same type of a metric when they were talking to all these people that were coming in with renewables. We threw billions of dollars away with no appreciable looking into what the ROI would be, the positive ROI. So do you not look at that? I mean, surely, maybe you can speak, I know you can't speak what's going on in other regions, but I would think that you all get together from time to time and you talk about best practices and what would be more efficient and what would be more effective. Is there any consideration given to the job creators out there as to what would be better for them?
Again, I think what I know we focus on is we focus on trying to meet the acts, but try to do it in a way in which we're working with the states and the applicants to move the project.
So the people that are actually in the business, that's not part of the equation?
Well, the projects are in the equation, which then is the folks who are going to do the project. Our focus is on trying to move the projects along, but protect the environment.
Man, and I guess from where you sit, that would be okay. I'm just talking to people that actually have to make a living and actually sign the front half of those paychecks. I would tell you that until you've been in that position, I mean, you fellas work for the government. I don't think you guys ever miss getting paid. I got to tell you, in the private sector, there's many times I have not paid myself and made sure that the guys and the gals that work for me get paid first. I wish we could flip that around in this government. I wish we could hold up the paychecks so this thing becomes more effective and more efficient. It doesn't run at $1.7 trillion a year in the red. And that same group of people that's running that model is trying to tell these folks how to run theirs. I would guarantee you that if all of us didn't get paid because of poor performance, you'd see the performance level rise real quick. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. Good point, Mr. Mather. Mrs. Hedman, or I should say Ms. Hedman, Dr. Hedman, she's chairing the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. Is that why she cannot, the reason she gave for not being able to be with us today?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, she's chairing a committee of the 15 federal agencies.
Okay. And where's that at?
Where's that meeting taking place?
I'm not sure of the
Well,
location.
we're looking at our schedule from yesterday, and it says that we'll chair the annual budget meeting for the federal agencies involved in implementation of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. That was yesterday at 12 noon, 12 to 5. So it's a 2-day meeting?
I was of the impression the meeting was continuing today.
Okay. And, but I mean, there's just no way she could have went from 12 to 5, 5 hours yesterday at this meeting. Flew to Columbus, been here, and then flew we understand this meeting is in, I think it's in Chicago. And flew back to Chicago, she just couldn't do that?
I can't speak to her schedule.
Well, when you guys talked about, obviously she told you, she says, I'm not going. You're gonna have to go take what they're gonna give to Mr. Gardner, what they're gonna give to me. You're gonna have to go take this. I don't wanna be there. I'd rather go chair a meeting that takes place 5 hours a day before, and I'm gonna make sure I stay overnight and be there for the second day, because I don't wanna go talk to the members of Congress. We're gonna talk about the jobs that have been lost because of the policies of this administration.
No, she actually asked me last week to represent her here today. And after consultation with the appropriate folks in Washington, I am here. And she wanted to make sure that I can answer your questions on how Region 5 does its business.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, would you?
Be happy to you.
Mr. Mather,
Yes.
I might remind you that you're under oath.
Yes.
Are you saying that you do not know whether your boss's meeting was yesterday or today? When was the meeting, Mr. Mather?
I honestly don't know exactly what were the dates of her meeting with the other federal agencies. All I was made aware of was that because...
Where is she today? Where is she physically today? Now, most everybody that's got a boss checks in periodically. You're the deputy administrator, and so she's probably pretty anxious about hearing how this hearing went. Where are you going to be calling her? Where is she today?
I honestly don't know where she is today.
Is the meeting typically, this is a meeting that happens periodically?
A face-to-face meeting happens infrequently.
No, I'm talking about the meeting she's at.
That's right.
This happens periodically? Is it typically a 1-day meeting, a 2-day meeting, a 5-day meeting, all-week meeting? Only a 2-day meeting when the alternative is you gotta come in front of a committee of Congress?
Periodically they meet by telephone. A face-to-face meeting is infrequently held, and I cannot tell you how long these meetings
This one is a
last.
face-to-face one?
Yes.
This one is a face-to-face one? And is it typically 1 day or 2 days?
It can go either 1 or 2 days. It has gone both ways in the past.
Yeah, but you don't know if this one is a 1 or 2 day?
I do not.
Yeah, and she didn't tell you you were coming here till last week? She didn't tell you that you were gonna be in front of this committee till last week?
I was made aware that I was going to attend this meeting, I think, very soon after the committee requested her presence at the meeting.
Did you guys discuss this meeting, what you would say and how the response you would give, or the fact that you wouldn't give an opening statement? Did you discuss all that?
Not with Ms. Hedman.
You did?
That was discussed with...
This is amazing. You're the number 2 at the region. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And this is, if this is indication of the infrequency that you communicate with the boss, then it's no wonder that people in the field have maybe a misunderstanding of what's going on. And if that's the kind of communication we have at the region, I think it's understandable why people are confused about this as well.
I think the preparation for this meeting was discussed more with the Congressional folks in Washington.
Okay. Further questions? Mr. Johnson.
Typically, it's not untypical for we ask witnesses to respond back with answers to questions that they don't know the answer to. Mr. Mather, we're going to be here for a few minutes after the adjournment of this meeting. Can you find out where your boss is? Can you call the office and find out where she's at today?
I most certainly will do that.
Okay, yeah, we'd like to know. Thank you.
Members will have 7 days to submit questions and information to the committee. I want to thank our guys. I know it's not always pleasant, but it's just the nature of this job. We appreciate you coming here. We appreciate you taking the time. I know you have busy schedules as well. Appreciate you coming to an important part of the country on an important issue, and participating in this morning's hearing. And thank all our members for being here, and thank the audience and members on our first panel. For those who are still here, we appreciate you all being here today. And with that, we're adjourned.
Thank you, sir.